Chapter 427. It's really not easy to subdue this primordial devil aura. Nia Wushang sighed and opened her eyes. Mo Tiange had been gone for some time, but she was still in closed-door meditation every day, working hard to subdue this primordial devil aura. However, from the time she regained consciousness 5 years ago until now, the amount of primordial devil aura she subdued was pitifully small. At this rate, she estimated her closed-door meditation would last for more than 100 years. It wasn't that she couldn't bear loneliness. Living with someone like Master Song Feng for more than 100 years, what else couldn't she endure? However, as long as she didn't solve this problem, she couldn't feel at ease. Is there any way to shorten this time? Nia Wushang thought silently. Suddenly, she sensed something, stood up, walked out of the cultivation room, and opened the stone door of the cave. I'm back again. Mo Tiange stood outside the cave, seemingly about to send her a message, but when she saw her, she shrugged helplessly. Nia Wushang was surprised. Didn't you go to see Ling Yunhe? Are you done? Do I look like I'm done? She sighed and walked into the cave. You don't mind if I continue to live here, do you? Nia Wushang was the one who paid the rent last time. Whatever, Nia Wushang said, closed the stone door, opened the restriction, and asked, what's going on? After tidying up her clothes, pouring tea, and sitting down at the stone table, Mo Tiange said, I can't go back. Huh? Nia Wushang was stunned and puzzled. What do you mean? I can't go back to the celestial pole, Mo Tiange said. Nia Wushang was stunned for a long time before she realized what she meant. She said incredulously, you mean the way you came here is blocked? Mo Tiange didn't tell Nia Wushang in detail how she came to the celestial pole. Nia Wushang also knew this kind of thing was mostly a secret, so she didn't ask. Although she didn't know the inside story, she guessed Mo Tiange's road must be very safe since she didn't take it seriously. But now Mo Tiange actually said she couldn't go back. Since the passage had disappeared, it couldn't be considered a secret. Mo Tiange simply told her about the road and the disappearance of the South Pole Island in detail. After Mo Tiange finished speaking, Nia Wushang was speechless for a long time. The passage that had existed for 5,000 years actually collapsed a few years after she came to Yunzhong. What else could she say? This was already bad luck to a certain extent. A good while later, Nia Wushang asked, then what do you plan to do now? Mo Tiange smiled bitterly. What else can we do? We can only find another way. We can't just stay in Yunzhong. You're not me. Nia Wushang pondered for a moment. If you can't find it, are you planning to cross the South Sea? Yes. That's why I came back to find you. Firstly, if you want to cross the South Sea, you'll need to be stronger. Secondly, you've done this before. Let me ask you about your experience. Without hesitation, Nia Wushang said, the reason why I was able to reach Yunzhong safely was because of luck and the treasures I stole from Master. To tell you the truth, luck played a big role in this. If one could safely cross the South China Sea by relying on a magic weapon, how could Yunzhong and the Celestial Pole not have any contact for so many years? However, if you need it, I can lend you that magic weapon. Mo Tiange was stunned. This. She came to ask Nia Wushang about her experience crossing the South China Sea, but she never thought she would be willing to lend her magic weapon. Magic weapons were cultivators' most precious and private things. Even good friends wouldn't lend them to each other. Moreover, since Nia Wushang relied on this magic weapon to safely reach Yunzhong, it showed that this thing was very powerful and was definitely an extremely precious top-grade magic weapon. The most important thing was that after she returned to the Celestial Pole, she didn't know whether she would come back to Yunzhong again. If she didn't come back, she wouldn't be able to return it. Seeing her expression, Nia Wushang already understood what she was thinking. She said faintly, you don't need to think too much. This thing may be very powerful, but it's useless to me now. After a pause, she said, let's talk about it again when you're really going to cross the South China Sea. What about the cloud-soaring crane? You didn't finish it, but did he deny it? I didn't see him. Mo Tiange looked at Nia Wushang and smiled bitterly again. You probably don't know it's already chaotic outside, right? What? Nia Wushang was surprised. What's going on? Mo Tiange sighed. It's complicated to explain. After spending some time, she explained to Nia Wushang everything she saw and heard after she went out. Although most of it was just rumors and illusions from Yunzhong, Nia Wushang had never heard of these things, so she listened with great interest. There's actually such a legend in Yunzhong. Nia Wushang was very surprised. Although the cultivation world in Yunzhong was much larger than in the Celestial Pole, their realms weren't much higher than the cultivators in the Celestial Pole. However, if the legend of the 5 saints was true, Yunzhong's history was much more glorious than the Celestial Pole's. In the history of the Celestial Pole, there were only rumors of 2 people successfully advancing to the deification realm, and there wasn't any solid evidence. But the 5 saints were different. They had 5 sacred objects handed down from generation to generation, and most of them had disciples to pass on, so their credibility was much higher. Heavenly Devil Tower. I really don't know what kind of magic weapon it is to be called a sacred object. After looking at it for a while, she still put the inescapable net back. After a moment of hesitation, she took out a rusty sword. This was the Fuxing sword she exchanged from Devil Monarch Xianyue. Although this sword was rusty, it had an extraordinary momentum. The power of wind and thunder could be faintly seen inside, so it was obviously not an ordinary weapon. However, this sword was seriously corroded by the devil aura. She couldn't see the slightest spiritual aura, and the body of the sword was dim. If she didn't look at it carefully, she would probably think it was a useless sword. After thinking for a while, Mo Tiange stood up and walked into the tool refining room. Seeing the familiar layout of the tool refining room, Mo Tiange stood still. She couldn't help but recall the scene and she refined the heaven and earth fan in the tool refining room. Her tool refining skills really weren't very good. Every small part here was made by Shi himself. At that time, the 2 of them stayed here for several years. Every day, they discussed how to refine the heaven and earth fan, experimenting again and again. In fact, when they were together, they rarely stuck to each other sweetly. Most of the time, they talked about their experiences and exchanged their thoughts. Although they weren't sweet enough, those days were full of happiness when she recalled them. Cultivation companions, companions who accompanied each other to seek immortality and seek the Tao, that was enough. How could their affectionate relationship compare to the long years of dependence and companionship? They had been separated for 10 years after leaving the Celestial Pole. In fact, Mo Tiange didn't miss him much, but now that she was in the place where they used to be together and touched the tools he used, she felt a surge of longing that drowned her. I haven't gone back for so many years. Is he doing well? Has he come out of closed-door meditation? Is he worried about me? If he knows I can't go back, will he come to find me? The scenes they used to be together kept emerging in her mind. The cold and taciturn senior martial brother Qin, the master Daoist Shoujing who took her to escape from Mount Yunwu, the 2 months of companionship. The senior martial brother Qin who risked his life to save her, the master Daoist Shoujing who coldly turned away when he saw her, and the 35 years of estrangement. At that time, they were so self-righteous. They could calculate shrewdly in other matters, but when it came to matters of the heart, they always made wild guesses about each other's thoughts. They held on to their pride and refused to put down their pride and treat each other honestly. Fortunately, they finally came together and didn't waste their fate. Thinking back, their meeting was so coincidental. If her father hadn't traveled with him, they wouldn't have met. If second uncle hadn't taken her away, she would have only regarded him as a senior when she grew up in Xianqing school. If he hadn't happened to go to Mount Yunwu, they wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet as peers. They would have missed each other by just a little bit. Fortunately, he was the person her father entrusted her to. Fortunately, they didn't know each other when she was young. Fortunately, she had grown up before they met. The more she thought back, the more she missed him. Therefore, she had to go back to the Celestial Pole. Chapter 428. Although she had made up her mind to return to the celestial pole, it was still a matter that needed long-term planning. The situation in Yinzhong was chaotic, so it wasn't a good time to go out. Moreover, it was too dangerous to cross the South Sea with her cultivation level. Considering these 2 points, Mo Tiange could only be patient and do it slowly. 120 years should be enough. The following days were very boring. Nia Wushang didn't leave her cave at all, and Mo Tiange also lived in seclusion. Every day, she cultivated, studied Mo Yaoqing's cultivation experience, read ancient books, and went out to buy some necessities and inquire about news from time to time. High-level cultivators in Yunzhong gathered in the returning ruined sea, and every day, some gossip spread in Guifang City. Not long after, there was a rumor in Guifang City that those cultivators had found traces of the Heavenly Devil Tower. The first cultivator to get the Heavenly Devil Tower had died in the returning ruined sea, and the tower fell into the hands of an individual cultivator. Later, there was another rumor that the individual cultivator escaped for several days and was discovered by a devil monarch, who killed him on the spot and took the Heavenly Devil Tower. Unfortunately, several great cultivators in eastern Tang also discovered it at the same time, and they fell into a fight. In this fight, South Zhou's Buddhist cultivators and Confucian cultivators were also involved. Hundreds and thousands of core formation cultivators fought in the returning ruined sea, and many nascent soul cultivators also shed all pretenses of cordiality. This rumor lasted for several years. Every time Mo Tiange went out, she heard the news of a certain cultivator from a certain sect dying. Mo Tiange and Nia Wushang discussed this in private. After this incident, the forces in Yunzhong would probably be reshuffled. So many cultivators died, and all of them were above the core formation realm. For many small cultivation groups, this would be a disaster. As expected, after that, the rumors in Guifang City were all about how many cultivators had fallen. This storm lasted for more than 20 years before it calmed down. In the first few years, cultivators from all sides fought for the Heavenly Devil Tower, and there was a reign of terror every day. During this period, many small cultivation groups were destroyed because of this. Later, the competition was limited to the nascent soul cultivators of the big cultivation groups. At the same time, as cultivators returned to their sects, the battlefield was no longer limited to the returning ruined sea. But soon, there were many different opinions about who got the Heavenly Devil Tower, and no one could figure it out. Oftentimes, there would be sects that had feuded with each other, claiming that the other party had the Heavenly Devil Tower in their hands. Because of this, Yunzhong was in a state of chaos. In the last 10 years, the storm gradually subsided. All the sects and forces suffered heavy losses and closed their doors to recuperate. Yunzhong finally calmed down. As for who the Heavenly Demon Tower ended up in, no one knew. Apart from the people who obtained the Heavenly Demon Tower, no one else benefited from this turmoil. Instead, they lost many outstanding core formation cultivators and even nascent soul cultivators. Some people even suspected that this was a conspiracy to make the major forces in Yunzhong kill each other and consume their strength. However, there was no doubt that the Heavenly Demon Tower had appeared. Many cultivators had seen this sacred object before, but it was a pity that before they could figure out how to use it, it had been taken away by others. When Mo Tiange heard this, she thought to herself, how could these nascent soul cultivators not think this might be a conspiracy? However, as long as the Heavenly Demon Tower was real, even if they had doubts, they would still jump down willingly. Advancing to the deification realm, for these nascent soul cultivators who had almost cultivated to the extreme and had no hope of advancing, they would not hesitate to risk their lives for it. Living in Guifang City, what Mo Tiange heard the most was about Guifang Demon Monarch and his subordinates. More than 10 years ago, Guifang Demon Monarch had already returned to Guifang City with his disciples. In this battle, although Guifang City's foundation was not shaken, it suffered a lot of losses. For example, among Guifang Demon Monarch's disciples, the two most likely to advance to the nascent soul realm died in the turmoil. For this, Guifang City's devil cultivators were very worried. Although Guifang Demon Monarch was powerful and was one of the 3 great demon monarchs, his lifespan was really running out. Some people calculated that he had 500 years at most. In these 500 years, if Guifang City did not have a powerful successor with profound cultivation, it would become the target of other forces. This was definitely not a good thing for Guifang City. However, some people optimistically said that Guifang Demon Monarch's young disciple with excellent aptitude had already advanced to the middle stage of the core formation realm. In 500 years, he might be able to smoothly advance to the nascent soul realm. At that time, Guifang City could still maintain its status as one of the 3 great devil territories. Besides, although Guifang City suffered losses, the other 2 devil territories also lost a lot of disciples. No one was better off than the other, so what did it matter? There were quite a lot of people who agreed with this theory. After all, low-level cultivators like them couldn't live for 500 years. After they died, who would care about the flood? The Guifang Demon Monarch's young disciple these cultivators mentioned should be Yang Qingji. In other words, Yang Qingji not only escaped unscathed in these more than 20 years of turmoil, but he also advanced to the middle stage of the core formation realm. Moreover, even the heavens were on his side, causing his rival senior brother to fall in the turmoil. In this way, his current days could be regarded as the end of his bitterness and the beginning of his happiness. Without his senior martial brother and sister suppressing him, he became Guifang Demon Monarch's disciple most likely to advance to the nascent soul realm. Guifang City would definitely support him with all its strength. From now on, no one would suppress him, and he would also become the real young lord of Guifang City. In the past more than 20 years, Nia Wushang's refining of the primordial devil aura was quite smooth, but the speed was a bit slow. Until now, she still only refined 1/3 of it. In this case, she still needed 50 years to refine this primordial devil aura for her own use. However, Nia Wushang said the subdued primordial devil aura had greatly improved her cultivation level. She estimated that in a few years, she could advance to the late stage of the core formation realm. If she could successfully subdue all the primordial devil aura in 50 years, she could advance to the nascent soul realm. Nia Wushang was now a devil cultivator, so mental cultivation was no longer important to her. It didn't matter if she directly entered closed-door meditation here until she advanced to the nascent soul realm. As for Mo Tiange, her cultivation in the past more than 20 years was also very smooth. She didn't take too many medicinal pills, but with her qualifications, Mo Yaoqing's cultivation experience, and the rich spiritual aura in the virtual sky world, her cultivation speed was terrifyingly fast. Now, she had reached the peak of the middle stage of the core formation realm and could enter closed-door meditation to advance to the late stage. Although she felt she passed this time's cultivation, Mo Tiange still decided to advance to the late stage first. Everything had its priorities. Her biggest problem now wasn't that her cultivation speed was too fast, but that her cultivation level wasn't high enough. Therefore, even if she had concerns about her unstable foundation, she still decided to advance to the nascent soul realm first. As for the problem of her mental state, it wouldn't be too late to consider it when she advanced to the nascent soul realm. After making this decision, Mo Tiange spent some time to buy the things she needed for her closed-door meditation. After informing Nia Wushang, she entered the virtual sky world to enter closed-door meditation. Sitting in the small room inside the virtual sky world, Mo Tiange didn't cultivate right away. In the past more than 20 years, she didn't just spend her time cultivating. In addition, she also read all the books inside the virtual sky world. She had already used her tool refining technique to grind away the rust on the Fusheng sword in her hand. Although it hadn't recovered its former elegance, it was still faintly shining. She took out the Fusheng sword from her Qinkuan bag. The body of the sword was like a vast expanse of autumn water, cold and chilly. The shape of the hilt was simple and unadorned. Upon closer inspection, 2 ancient characters were engraved on the hilt, Fusheng. Although it was no longer mottled with rust, the whole sword was surrounded by a layer of faintly discernible devil aura. This devil aura looked very faint, but Mo Tiange couldn't get rid of it when she tried. She guessed that this sword had been left in the devil domain for several tens of thousands of years. Over time, the originally weak devil aura accumulated into a terrifying power, gradually corroding the masterless Fusheng sword. After several tens of thousands of years of accumulation, no matter how powerful the Fusheng sword was originally, it still couldn't resist the corrosion of time. She once asked Nia Wushang how to deal with this kind of situation, but Nia Wushang said she didn't have an answer. Although she grew up with Master Song Feng, the primordial devil great technique wasn't the same as the cultivation technique of devil cultivators. Besides, this kind of situation was too special, so she had no way of knowing. Mo Tiange turned to search for relevant information in the books left by the previous master of the virtual sky world. In the end, Fei Fei told her that in the Middle Ages, there was a secret treasure called spirit-quenching water. This thing was the nemesis of devil aura and was said to be able to eliminate everything related to devil aura. Fei Fei was idle and bored in the virtual sky world. Aside from cultivating and playing with Xiaohua, the rest of its time was to read books. It was originally a divine beast, so its intelligence wasn't inferior to that of humans. Its memory was even better, it almost never forgot anything. Mo Tiange found that book. Sure enough, there was a record of spirit-quenching water, but this water only appeared occasionally in the Middle Ages immortal realm. It was extremely rare and precious. The Middle Ages immortal realm that was called the Middle Ages immortal realm had long disappeared from the world and was nowhere to be found. Mo Tiange was greatly disappointed and could only give up for the time being. She occasionally took out the Fusheng sword to study whether there was any other way to eliminate the devil aura. In fact, according to Black Moon Devil Monarch, the current Fusheng sword already had a certain amount of power, so it wouldn't be a problem for her to use it as a magic weapon. However, if the devil aura on the sword could be eliminated, the sword could regain its former sharpness. Since this sword was the sword of Fu Yaozi, the #1 cultivator in Yunzhong's history, if it regained its former power, how powerful would it be? Even though Mo Tiange wasn't too greedy for magic weapons, she still felt agitated when she thought about this. She put away the Fusheng sword, then arranged the items she bought, this time one by one. Although she didn't really need spiritual plants, cultivating in seclusion for more than 20 years still cost her a lot of spirit stones. There were most spiritual plants in the virtual sky world, but there were always some ingredients that couldn't be found here, so she had to buy them. Formation tools, talismans, and so on. Although they didn't cost much each time, they added up to a considerable amount. This was Guifang City, so Dao cultivators' things weren't cheap. In the past more than 20 years, Mo Tiange watched as her pockets flattened. In the past, she received a lot of offerings from the cultivation group, and Bishuan Court once again paid her several tens of thousands of spirit stones. In addition to the many Qiankuan bags she picked up on Demonic Mountain and the belongings of cultivators she killed, she didn't take spirit stones seriously for a while. But even if she had too many spirit stones, they couldn't make up for so many years of not making any money. Moreover, the cost of reaching the core formation realm wasn't small. After realizing this, Mo Tiange began to plan carefully. As long as she controlled herself and avoided spending as much as possible, the spirit stones she had should be enough for her until she formed her nascent soul. Once she became a nascent soul cultivator, she naturally wouldn't need to worry about spirit stones anymore. In the end, she shook her head and threw these trivial matters to the back of her mind. She then tidied up the miscellaneous items, sat cross-legged on the praying mat, started to meditate, and began to breathe. During this closed-door meditation, she definitely had to enter the late stage of the core formation realm. Chapter 429. In the sky above Guifang City, several people were standing in the air where the fog lingered. These people were all wearing monk robes and straw shoes. They were bald and scarred, holding Buddhist staffs and dressed like monks. However, the color and style of their kasayas were slightly different. Among them, the one with the most exquisite kasaya and the strongest momentum was an old monk with white eyebrows and a white beard. This old monk was sitting cross-legged on the lotus platform with his palms together and his eyes closed. He was surrounded by other monks with Buddhist beads hanging in front of his chest. "Jueshin, is it here?" the old monk asked. When he asked, his eyes were still closed, his face was calm, and he didn't move at all. A middle-aged monk standing next to him lowered his head and answered, "Yes, master. I've investigated. The person we're looking for is here." And the old monk nodded slightly. "Lead the way." "Yes," the middle-aged monk answered respectfully. Then he looked up and said to the others, "Junior Marshall brothers, let's go." Under the guidance of this middle-aged monk, a group of people hid in the fog and quietly sneaked into Guifang City. However, none of the cultivators in Guifang City noticed them. Even the city protecting restriction didn't move. At this moment, if there were high-level cultivators here, they would find that the old monk with a kind face was actually a cultivator in the late stage of nascent soul, and the disciples around him were all in the core formation realm. Mo Tiange opened her eyes, looked at her hands, and was overjoyed. With enough medicinal pills and 3 years of closed-door meditation, she finally advanced to the late stage of core formation realm smoothly. This speed wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either. Before this, her cultivation level was high, but her mental state cultivation hadn't reached the realm where success would come naturally. In the past 3 years, while she cultivated, she used all kinds of panaceas to help her stabilize her spiritual aura and calm her mind. Only in this way could she smoothly advance to the middle stage of core formation realm step by step. For traditional Taoist cultivators like them, if their mental state wasn't strong enough, it would be much more difficult for them to advance. Unfortunately, many Taoist cultivators didn't understand this. Although they knew they had to cultivate their mental state, they didn't pay much attention to it. In this world, spiritual aura was scarce and cultivation was difficult, so many Taoist cultivators took the same path of cultivation as devil cultivators. They only pursued strength and didn't pay attention to mental state cultivation. Once she sensed the abundance of spiritual aura in her body, she stretched her body, then opened the cultivation room's restriction. As soon as the door was opened, Fei Fei ran in. "Ah, master, you really did advance." Fei Fei's cheerful voice made Mo Tiange instinctively feel like there was a conspiracy. She asked warily, "What are you doing?" Fei Fei blinked. "No, I'm just saying." After a while, it wagged its tail and said, "Master, it's been 29 years. Mo Tiange understood what it meant. 29 years. It had been 29 years since they discovered that the South Pole Island had sunk. In other words, it had been more than 40 years since she left the celestial pole. The remaining time was less than 100 years. Although she accepted Wanderer Ziwei's task together with Daoist Fangjing, with Daoist Fangjing's cultivation level and lifespan, the possibility of him completing the task within 200 years was next to none, so she had to do it herself. Even if she couldn't do it, she had to return to Ziwei's Immortal's Cave in the Celestial Pole. Otherwise, even if Wanderer Ziwei suddenly became kind and didn't want her to die, it would be useless. 29 years. Mo Tiange sighed. Time was tight. Since she hadn't taken care of the virtual sky world for 3 years, Mo Tiange spent some time tidying it up. She first ordered the 2 stone sculpture puppets to tidy up the medicinal fields and then to repair the bamboo house. As for the 3 spiritual beasts, they didn't need her care at all. Xiaohua grew up here, so it was more familiar with the spiritual plants in the medicinal fields than she was. As for Fei Fei and Xiaofan, they already had spiritual intelligence, so she didn't need to worry about them at all. Afterwards, she left the virtual sky world. As soon as she stepped out of her cultivation room, the door of Nia Wushang's cultivation room opened at the same time. "Sure enough, you made a realm breakthrough smoothly." Nia Wushang, who was sitting cross-legged on the stone bed, raised her head and smiled at her. Mo Tiange looked at her with surprise. "You also made a realm breakthrough." Nia Wushang was now in the late stage of the core formation realm. Her primordial devil aura had converged a lot, but her power had become stronger. Nia Wushang straightened her clothes, got off the bed and walked out of the cultivation room. The 2 of them sat down casually in the hall. "When we first met, I was in the late stage of the foundation building realm and you were in the middle stage. My cultivation level was higher than yours, and I'm older than you, so how could I fall behind you? Mo Tiange was stunned, then burst into laughter. You actually remember this. In the cultivation world, it was very common for the younger to have a higher cultivation level than the older. Very few people would judge their cultivation level by age, unless they thought highly of themselves and were unwilling to admit defeat. Mo Tiange didn't expect Nia Wushang to be so competitive. I always have to find some motivation for myself. Nia Wushang said sternly, by the way, since you've advanced to the late stage, what are you going to do next? It doesn't matter to me now. It doesn't matter if I enter closed-door meditation here until I reach the nascent soul realm, but you don't seem to be able to, right? This was exactly what Mo Tiange was worried about. She thought for a while, then said with a sigh, what else can I do? The turmoil in Yunzhong is almost over, so it shouldn't matter if I go out now. That being the case, I'd better go find Ling Yunhe. On one hand, I can collect my debt, and on the other hand, I can ask him for information. Nia Wushang nodded. That's a good idea. She then smiled. Have you asked around? Is Ling Yunhe still alive? This Mo Tiange also didn't know. In Guifang City, the news she heard were all mixed. Eastern Tang was, after all, a bit far away. Even if Jiuyan's sect was the #1 sect in Yunzhong, devil cultivators didn't have much interest in its sect head. However, Ling Yunhe shouldn't be that unlucky, right? No matter what, he's the sect head of Jiuyan's sect, and he's favored by the elders. He shouldn't have been sacrificed, right? Probably. Nia Wushang shrugged. She didn't care about Ling Yunhe. In any case, the debt he owed her wasn't very useful now. When are you going to leave? Probably. Just as she was about to say something, she suddenly felt a chill on her back. She and Nia Wushang looked at the door at the same time, looking vigilant. There's someone, Nia Wushang said in a low voice. Mo Tiange nodded lightly, stood up, and completely activated the restrictions around the cave. At the same time, she spread her divine sense. They're coming for us, she said. It was very easy to distinguish this point. The cave they chose was very remote. Although there were other cultivators living in the surroundings, they laid restrictions and didn't receive any voice transmissions, so those cultivators were smart enough not to disturb them. But now, there were several auras outside that were heading straight for their cave abode. Among them, there was one aura that was even more shocking. Nascent Soul Cultivator. Nia Wushang also sensed it, and her expression was a bit strange. Why are there nascent soul cultivators? Moreover, their auras are extremely strong. They don't seem to be ordinary people. They lived with nascent soul cultivators all year round, so based on their experience, it was very easy to distinguish between the early stage and the late stage of the nascent soul realm. This person's aura was definitely that of a late-stage nascent soul cultivator. Moreover, his aura was deliberately restrained, and he was deliberately coming for them. Now, they wouldn't believe it if they said they were being too sensitive. As expected, those people finally stopped in front of their cave abode. Zhu Xian, the old monk on the lotus throne, called out with his eyes closed. He didn't move at all. Yes, Master, the middle-aged monk whose Buddhist name was Zhu Xian answered respectfully. Without needing any instructions, he already stood out. Zhu Xian stood in front of the cave's stone door and said loudly, "Benefactors in the cave, we monks from Mount Baifu's Huayan Temple take the liberty to ask for an audience." The monk's voice wasn't loud, but his breath was steady. His voice was like a heavy bell, entering the ears of the two people inside the cave. After a while, there was still no movement. The monk spoke again, "Two benefactors, we are monks from Mount Baifu's Huayan Temple. We take the liberty to request an audience with you." His tone was neither hurried nor slow, but there was a hint of grandeur in it. A moment later, the cave's stone door was finally opened. Two women appeared in front of the monks. One of them was black and the other was white, a Taoist and a devil. Mo Tiange stood half a step ahead of Nia Wushang. Her gaze swept over the monks in front of her and finally fell on the late-stage, nascent soul old monk. She saluted him and said, "Greetings to Senior Buddhist. May I know why masters have graced us with their presence?" The late-stage, nascent soul old monk still had his eyes closed and didn't answer. Monk Ju Exian, who shouted just now, also didn't say anything. All the monks' gazes fell on the young monk standing on the side with his head lowered and his palms clasped together. The tall young monk raised his head and his gaze fell on Mo Tiange. He took 2 steps forward and stood next to Monk Ju Exian. Soon after, he cupped his hands and saluted Mo Tiange. "Benefactor, do you still remember this poor monk?" Upon hearing what he said, Mo Tiange stared at the monk with a slight frown. This monk didn't look different from the others. He was wearing the same monk's robe and straw shoes, had a respectful attitude, and was in the early stage of the core formation realm. Among this group of monks, he didn't stand out at all. However, when Mo Tiange looked at him, she felt a sense of familiarity. This feeling wasn't strong, which meant this person definitely wasn't someone she had a deep impression of. Maybe they only met once or twice, and it was a long time ago. Seeing that she didn't answer, the monk said again, 40 years ago, when I was still in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, I offended Benefactor in Sky Snow City. Benefactor, do you still remember? 40 years ago, Sky Snow City. Mo Tiange hadn't seen many cultivators in Yunzhong, and Buddhist cultivators were even fewer. Upon hearing what he said, her eyes suddenly widened. "So it's you." Seeing that she recognized him, the monk smiled. His attitude was still calm. "I am. It's been many years since we last met. Benefactor, how have you been?" Mo Tiange took a deep breath, then turned around and gave Nia Wushang a meaningful glance. Her meaning was, "These people are coming for me." She already remembered who this person was. 40 years ago, there were 2 foundation building cultivators who tried to rob her in Sky Snow City. One of them spoke rudely and was killed by her, while the other one had a good character, so she let him go. It was from them that she obtained the inescapable net. Thinking about the inescapable net, Mo Tiange already understood why these people were looking at her. The inescapable net in her hands must be the sacred Buddhist relic left behind by Great Master Hui Yin. It wasn't an imitation, it was the real deal. She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted her gaze to the old monk Yuan Ho, whose eyes were still closed. The old monk had a smile on his face and a kind countenance, but he didn't say anything. "May I ask who you are, great masters?" The middle-aged monk, Ju Exian, chanted the name of Buddha, then said, "Benefactor, we're disciples of Mount Baifu's Huayan Temple. This poor monk's master and also our temple's Puji the Venerable. His Dharma name is Wuming. This poor monk's Dharma name is Ju Exian, and these are my junior martial brothers. This is Ju Wu." In the end, he deliberately pointed at the young monk who spoke to her before. Mo Tiange nodded slightly. Although the other party didn't come with good intentions, his attitude was very polite, so she couldn't be rude. She cupped her hands and said, "I'm from the outer endless sea. My surname is Qin and my given name is Wei. This is my good friend, Tian Can. Presumably, Great Master's purpose in coming here has nothing to do with her, right?" Chapter 430. Among Venerable Avidya's disciples, Jueshin was obviously the one with the longest seniority, so he was the one who spoke for Venerable Avidya. Upon hearing Mo Tiange's words, Jueshin said, "So it's Benefactor Qin." "Yes, we came to look for you. From what you said, I presume you know what we're here for." Mo Tiange said faintly, "I didn't at first, but I guessed after seeing your junior martial brother." Jueshin put his palms together and bowed. "Since that's the case, I wonder if Benefactor Qin is willing to return the original item?" Mo Tiange didn't answer immediately. She first looked at Jueshin, then at Jueshin, who had his head lowered, and finally at Venerable Avidya, who had been smiling with his eyes closed. Venerable Avidya was a respectful title in Buddhism. Only nascent soul cultivators with extraordinary strength could be granted this title. Ordinary nascent soul cultivators were only called venerables. It seemed this venerable Avidya had an extraordinary position in Huayan Temple. However, she was very curious. Since this Buddhist cultivator's Dharma name was Avidya and his eyes were closed, could he really not see? Looking at the situation in front of her, Mo Tiange weighed the situation and said, "Venerable Avidya, masters, to be honest, if Master Jueshin hadn't come, I would have long forgotten about this matter. Now that I've met Master Jueshin, I know what happened that year was unusual." Seeing that Jueshin wanted to say something, she raised her hand and continued, "I'm not interested in other people's sect matters. However, I believe Master Jueshin has already explained what happened that year to the other masters. Since that's the case, shouldn't you give us an explanation for the items you're asking for?" Her words were neither servile nor overbearing. She didn't become submissive because of Venerable Avidya's power, nor did she admit that they were unlucky because they had more people. For a moment, the monks were speechless. Jueshin probably also felt it was inconvenient to answer, so he turned to look at his master behind him. Venerable Avidya still had his eyes closed and a smile on his face. This made Jueshin a bit uncertain. He turned back and said hesitantly, "Benefactor Qin, this matter, Jueshin." Venerable Avidya, who had been silent, suddenly said, "Let Master say it." Jueshin hastily turned around and bowed respectfully. "Yes, Master." He then stood to the side. Benefactor Qin. Revered Wu Ming's eyes remained closed the entire time. His voice was neither fast nor slow. "What happened in the past was related to the internal affairs of my temple, so it was inconvenient for me to explain it to you. I ask that you forgive me." This revered Wu Ming was a late-stage nascent soul cultivator, but he was actually so polite to a mere core formation cultivator. Mo Tiange was very surprised. Although she did not know much about Buddhism, she had been in Yunzhong for a long time. She knew that the rules of Buddhism were very different from those of Tao sects. Buddhist cultivators were very strict. Although the one with the highest cultivation level was still respected, they all judged right and wrong based on reason. It was also because of this that she had the guts to say these words in front of these people. However, she did not expect a late nascent soul cultivator like Reverend Avidya to treat others with such politeness. This made her a little embarrassed. "Senior." Mo Tiange cupped her fists and said, "Junior has no intention of prying into the affairs of your esteemed temple. It's just that you've come to my immortal's cave with such a great commotion, and you even want to ask for magic weapons, so you must give me an explanation." This old monk understands benefactor's intention. Revered Avidya had a smile on his face and a calm expression on his face. "Normally, it was my Huayan Temple's disciples who offended benefactor first, so benefactor is not at fault. However, benefactor killed one of my temple's disciples and took away my temple's magic weapon, so this matter can be considered even. What do you think?" Upon hearing what he said, Mo Tiange wrinkled her brows slightly. Just a moment ago, she thought this revered Avidya's attitude was amiable and didn't have the slightest domineering characteristic of late nascent soul cultivators. However, his words were rather thought-provoking. What happened that day was originally because two Huayan Temple's disciples schemed against her first. Even if she killed both of them, it wouldn't be considered a mistake. However, she didn't kill them all. Not only did she leave a way out for Ju Wu, but she also didn't seize his Qinkuan bag. She only took away the magic weapon that schemed against her. She was already being merciful. That being the case, since this group of people came to ask for the magic weapon, they should apologize to her. However, this old monk said they offended her, so she also killed them and took their treasures, so they were even. This was a bit confusing, right and wrong. Mo Tiange thought in her heart that a late nascent soul cultivator was a late nascent soul cultivator after all. No matter how amiable he was, he still wasn't willing to lose face in front of his juniors. However, this actually aroused her temper, and she couldn't help but want to argue with this revered Avidya. With that thought in mind, Mo Tiange revealed a smile and said, "What senior said makes sense." Seeing that she agreed, revered Avidya continued to say, "Since benefactor doesn't have any objections, could you return our temple's magic weapon? Ha! Mo Tiange chuckled. She stared at revered Avidya in front of her and said unhurriedly, Senior just said that 2 of your temple's disciples offended me first, so it's not wrong for me to kill one of them and take away the magic weapon, right? Revered Avidya nodded. Yes. That being the case, between me and your temple, there's no longer a problem of who owes whom, right? Revered Avidya paused for a moment before answering, correct. Mo Tiange smiled. That being the case, isn't Senior pressuring me by asking me to directly hand over the magic weapon? All the monks were dumbfounded. Even Revered Avidya didn't answer. After a moment of silence, someone among the monks couldn't hold back anymore and shouted, Benefactor, the inescapable net is our temple's precious treasure. My master asked you nicely for it, but you actually, Juehue. Jueshin shouted, Master's here. You can't be rude. The monk glared at Mo Tiange reluctantly, then lowered his head to accept the instruction. Yes, eldest martial brother. After a while, Revered Avidya finally spoke. Benefactor, this old monk might as well speak frankly. Keeping that magic weapon in your hands is a disaster, not a blessing. If you hand it back to this old monk, at first glance, it might seem like you've suffered a loss, but when disaster strikes, you'll know what this old monk said isn't false. Mo Tiange remained unmoved. But if I hand this thing over to Senior, it'll definitely be of great benefit to Senior. Nevertheless, Revered Avidya said, Benefactor, if someone else came here, they definitely wouldn't be so polite. Mo Tiange raised her eyebrows, but in the next second, she smiled. A late nascent realm cultivator was a late nascent realm cultivator after all. Although he spoke politely, he didn't want to suffer a loss at all. The meaning of his words was clear, with my status and cultivation level, how could I be polite to you? Yet you still don't know what's good for you? She naturally knew she had to hand over the inescapable net in front of a late nascent realm cultivator. However, she wasn't willing to keep it safe for someone else for 40 years, so she had to get something back, right? She sighed. In any case, Senior is a late nascent realm expert. Do you really want to be calculative with a small cultivator like me? Upon hearing this, Revered Avidya paused for a moment, then suddenly smiled. From the moment he appeared until just now, his expression had been benevolent and his words had been gentle, maintaining the demeanor of a senior eminent monk. It wasn't until now that he finally showed a little bit of humanity. With his eyes still closed, he said with a smile, It's my fault as a senior. Little fellow Taoist, what benefit do you want? Just tell me directly. From benefactor to little fellow Taoist, the way this Revered Avidya addressed her was undoubtedly one step closer. Mo Tiange knew her behavior didn't annoy him. In fact, he even had a little favorable impression of her, which made her feel relieved. Even though she was bold, wanting to ask for benefits from a late nascent realm cultivator she didn't know, she was still worried. After pondering for a moment, she took out something from her chinkuan bag and spread it on her palm. Senior, Junior isn't someone who doesn't know what's good for her. Since this thing belongs to your honorable temple, I'll return it to you. As soon as she took out the inescapable net, everyone's gazes immediately focused on her hand. Ju Xian cried out involuntarily, It's the inescapable net. It's really the inescapable net. Ju Wu, who was standing on the side, chanted Buddha's name and muttered excitedly to himself, Master, the sacred object is finally back. Disciple didn't become a sinner of Huayan Temple, and Mo Tiange took another look at him. When Ju Wu said that, his gaze was directed at the sky as if he was talking to someone who had already passed away. Could it be that Revered Avidya wasn't his master? This wasn't impossible. 40 years ago, Ju Wu was only a foundation-building cultivator, but he had a Buddhist sacred object in his possession. This was already unusual. If he really was Revered Avidya's disciple, how could he and his junior martial brother have been driven out and reduced to the point of robbing passers-by? Presumably, this matter involved Huayan Temple secrets. Seeing Mo Tiange taking out the treasure so straightforwardly, the smile on Revered Avidya's face became even brighter. Buddhist light flashed on his right hand, and the inescapable net in Mo Tienga's hand flew up. In a flash, it was already in his hand. Revered Avidya spread the object and carefully felt it with both hands. It seemed like his eyes really couldn't see. After a while, he raised his head and said with a smile while holding the inescapable net, "Since little fellow Taoist is so straightforward, this old monk can't be too stingy. Whatever you want, don't hesitate to say it." What he said made Mo Tienga feel relieved. Although this revered Avidya was somewhat astute, in the end, he was much more generous than those late nascent soul cultivators who used their power to oppress others. He didn't go back on what he just promised. She cupped her hands and said, "Junior wants to exchange some information from Senior." "Oh." Revered Avidya's smile was quite meaningful. Although his eyes were closed, Mo Tienga felt a sharp gaze on her. "Little fellow Taoist, you said before that you wouldn't pry into my temple's internal affairs, right?" "Of course." Mo Tienga's gaze fell on the inescapable net in his hand. She said calmly, "What Junior wants to know doesn't have much to do with your temple." Revered Avidya was quite satisfied with her answer. He nodded and said, "That being the case, just say it." She thought for a while, then said slowly, "Junior once heard about the legend of the 5 saints in Yunzhong. Rumor has it that when the 5 saints passed away, they left behind 5 magic weapons, all of which were called holy objects. 2 of them were the heavenly devil pagoda and the inescapable net. May I know what the other 3 are?" Revered Avidya paused for a while, then said, "This question indeed has nothing to do with my temple's internal affairs, so I can answer you. The other 3 holy objects of the 5 saints are Saint Guizhen's soul-restricting bead, Master Zhou's nameless book, and Fuyazi's Fusheng sword." Mo Tienga took a deep breath, then asked, "Rumor has it that these 5 holy objects can open the mysterious space in the Sea of Returning Ruins. Is that true?" Upon hearing this question, Revered Avidya smiled slightly. "I can't answer this question accurately. I can only tell you that the 5 holy objects have other uses and are also related to the Sea of Returning Ruins. But whether they're used to open the mysterious space or for other uses, I don't know." After a pause, Revered Avidya asked again, "Little fellow Taoist, do you have any other questions?" "No." Mo Tienga bowed respectfully. "Thank you for telling me, Senior." Revered Avidya smiled. He was about to say something, but in the next second, his smile disappeared and he looked up at the sky. At that moment, Mo Tienga heard a deep voice coming from the sky. "Old monk Avidya, why didn't you say hello when you came to my Guifang city?" Chapter 431. Mo Tienga raised her head and looked at the source of the voice. Before long, a group of people appeared out of nowhere in the sky filled with devil aura. "Late-stage nascent soul," Nia Wushang murmured, her eyes falling on the leading cultivator. If they weren't sure this person was in the late stage of nascent soul, they would never think he was Guifang City Lord, one of the 3 great devil monarchs of Yunzhong demonic path. This Guifang demonic monarch looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. He was thin, had a pale face, and had a gentle bearing. There was no devil aura on his body, but he was elegant like a teacher in the secular world. However, his momentum was extremely strong, not weaker than that of Venerable Avidya. In Guifang City, who could have such momentum except for Guifang demonic monarch? Moreover, Mo Tienga saw Yang Qingji standing behind him at a glance. Fellow Taoist Guifang. The moment he noticed Guifang demonic monarch, Venerable Avidya had already put away the inescapable net. He put his palms together with a smile and said, "I'm just passing by. I have important things to do, so it's not convenient for me to meet you." He. Guifang demonic monarch's voice was a little hoarse, and he looked coldly at the Buddhist cultivators below. "Old monk Avidya, as Venerable Puji, it doesn't seem right for you to bring so many disciples into my Guifang city without greeting us, right?" The cities of the demonic path were different from the cities of the righteous path. Whether it was the state of Eastern Tang or the state of Southern Zhou, they all had their own royal families and prefectures. Even in a cultivation city like Sky Snow City, there were officials appointed by the imperial court to manage the mortals and take care of mundane affairs. Sky Snow City was under the influence of Ling clan, but nominally, anyone could come and go. However, Demonic Path City was built by the city lord and belonged to him. It had nothing to do with the royal family of Northern Qilan Nation. Therefore, Guifang City was actually Guifang Demonic Monarch's private territory. Venerable Avidya came to Guifang City, but he didn't greet Guifang Demonic Monarch and didn't go through the city gate. How could Guifang Demonic Monarch just let it go? However, Mo Tiange was very curious. No matter what, Guifang Devil Monarch was one of the 3 strongest devil monarchs, and Guifang City was also his private territory. Why did he only find out after revered Avidya brought his disciples into Guifang City? Could it be that revered Wu Ming had some secret technique that blocked the Ghost Square Demon Monarch's divine sense? However, a late Yuan cultivator was a late Yuan cultivator after all. Although he was a bit late, he still arrived before revered Avidya left. Venerable Wu Ming, on the other hand, was still smiling, and there was not even a hint of guilt on his face. Fellow Taoist Guifang, why do you have to be so calculative? This old monk will leave with my disciple right now. How about it? Humph. Ghostcraft Fiend Monarch said coldly, Old monk, you have a good plan. You want to leave? Leave it here first. Something? Revered Wu Ming looked surprised. Fellow Taoist Guifang, what are you talking about? If she hadn't personally handed the inescapable net to Venerable Avidya just now, Mo Tiange would have thought he really didn't take anything. Such a benevolent-looking eminent monk actually acted like a scoundrel so naturally, it really made people speechless. Ghostcraft Fiend Monarch's expression darkened. Old monk Avidya, don't be so shameless. This is Guifang City, not your Baifu Mountain. This old monk may be old, but his eyes aren't blurry. There's no need for fellow Taoist Guifang to remind me, revered Avidya answered with a smile. Seeing Ghostcraft Fiend Monarch's darkened expression, Mo Tiange pulled Nia Wushang and cautiously retreated a few steps, hiding inside the cave. Fortunately, she already handed over the inescapable net. For Ghostcraft Fiend Monarch, they were basically insignificant characters, he didn't even spare them a glance. It seems they'll most likely fight, Nia Wushang said softly as she looked outside with a bit of worry. Mo Tiange carefully closed the cave's stone door, then quickly laid a bunch of restrictions around the cave. Will it work? Nia Wushang expressed her doubts upon seeing her actions. Late-stage nascent soul cultivators, if they fight, they can raise the whole mountaintop to the ground. They won't fight here, Mo Tiange said with certainty. I'm just taking precautions. Oh, right. Nia Wushang nodded. This was Guifang City. How could Ghostcraft Fiend Monarch fight casually in his own territory? A battle between late nascent soul cultivators could possibly destroy an entire city. Bald donkey. Ghostcraft Fiend Monarch's gloomy voice rang out. It seems you won't obediently hand over the thing if we don't fight. Revered Avidya's voice was still as calm as ever. Fellow Taoist Guifang, this thing is our Buddhist sacred object. What's the use of it for you? If you give me face today, my Huayan temple will owe you a favor in the future. Isn't that good? Humph. Ghostcraft Fiend Monarch said coldly, you make it sound nice. The Heavenly Demon Tower is our Devil Path's sacred object, but didn't you Buddhist cultivators still come to snatch it? Judging from his tone, Ghostcraft Fiend Monarch was extremely resentful. Could it be that the Buddhist cultivators played a part in his failure to snatch the Heavenly Demon Tower this time? Fellow Taoist Guifang. Revered Avidya dragged out his tone as if he was patiently persuading him. The matter regarding the Heavenly Demon Tower was out of control in the end. We also had no choice. Now that it's over, it's useless to argue about it, isn't it? This old monk looks like an eminent monk, but how could he be so shameless? Nia Wushang said in a low voice. She could also be considered a devil path cultivator now, so she really couldn't stand revered Avidya's behavior. Mo Tiange smiled. That depends on who he's dealing with. He doesn't mind showing the demeanor of a senior expert to insignificant cultivators like us, but when he's dealing with cultivators in the same realm as him, if he takes a step back, he'll be giving away his own benefits. Nia Wushang nodded, then said with a sigh, even if the Buddhist commandments are stricter, they're still cultivators after all. In front of benefits, they have to fight for it. Mo Tiange didn't say anything. Compared to other Taoists, the teachings of Buddhism were obviously gentler, but no matter how gentle it was, it had its limits. Revered Avidya didn't mind a junior like her negotiating conditions in front of him, and he was willing to give her some benefits. For him, she was still too insignificant. How could people haggle with ants? But in front of cultivators in the same realm as him, like Guifang Demon Monarch, he wouldn't take half a step back. He couldn't give up something that a late-stage nascent soul cultivator fancied. If he retreated, he'd lose the benefits of himself and the entire Huayan temple behind him. Cut the crap. You snuck into my Guifang city, so don't even think about leaving with that thing. Guifang Demon Monarch was already impatient. When he said that, the two of them felt the spiritual aura pressure suddenly increase. Fortunately, Mo Tiange had laid a restriction before, so the spiritual aura pressure weakened a lot. Besides, Mo Tiange's soul-refining art had been cultivated to a very high level, and Nia Wushang had strong primordial devil aura in her body, so they weren't affected. Fellow Taoist Guifang, don't be so anxious. Isn't it bad to fight and kill for no reason? Both of us lost a lot in the Sea of Returning Ruins last time. It's time for us to recuperate. Why should we waste our energy? You make it sound so nice. Guifang Demonic Monarch said angrily, you have obtained the sacred item of Buddhism, so you are naturally satisfied. If I allow you to sneak into my Guifang city and take away a sacred item, how can I have the face to live in this world? Old bald donkey, I'll give you two choices. 1, we'll have a good fight outside the city. If you win, you're free to come and go, and I won't say a word. If you lose, you'll leave the thing behind obediently, and you can still leave safely with your disciples. 2, I'll directly activate Guifang City's great restriction and kill you and your disciples at the risk of destroying the city. What do you think? Choose one. In the end, Guifang Demon Monarch's tone became gloomy. Obviously, he couldn't let this matter go. These two choices were very simple. Either one fight to decide the outcome, or the other fight to the death. What Mo Tiange guessed was right. This was Guifang City, so Guifang Demon Monarch couldn't possibly not care about it at all, so he proposed the first solution. In this way, Guifang City could be unscathed, and Venerable Avidya wouldn't be distracted by the safety of his disciples. However, whoever lost would lose the holy object, and they couldn't go back on their word. But if they chose the second solution, it would be a fight to the death. Guifang Demon Monarch would bet Guifang City, while Venerable Avidya would have to pay with his and his disciples' lives. At first glance, this solution seemed to make Guifang Demon Monarch suffer more losses, but Guifang City was a place he had been managing for 1,000 years. How could he let others come and go? Once he activated Guifang City's great restriction, Venerable Avidya would most likely die no matter how powerful he was. Of course, with the great divine power of a late nascent soul cultivator, Guifang City and all the cultivators in the city would disappear from the world. At that time, although Guifang Demon Monarch survived and obtained the Buddhist holy object, his 1,000-year foundation would be destroyed in a day. Moreover, he was very likely to be seriously injured, and his cultivation level might be greatly damaged. In the end, he wouldn't have a good ending. It wasn't easy to cultivate to the nascent soul realm. Breaking through to the late stage of the nascent soul realm was even more rare among nascent soul cultivators. The higher the level of a cultivator, the more they cherished their lives. The first solution was the one that suited their interests. However, in addition to this, it also depended on Venerable Avidya's confidence and the importance of this Buddhist holy object. If Huayan Temple didn't hesitate to use the whole temple to retrieve this Buddhist holy object, then Venerable Avidya would have to fight Guifang Demon Monarch even if he had to sacrifice the lives of himself and his disciples. Hey, fellow Taoist Guifang. Venerable Avidya's voice sounded very helpless. Do you have to leave no way out? Humph. No need to talk nonsense, just choose. After that, there was no more conversation. Mo Tiange and Nia Wushang felt the spiritual aura pressure getting stronger and stronger. In the end, it was so strong that the two of them felt uncomfortable. From time to time, the sound of other disciples coughing up blood because they couldn't bear the spiritual aura pressure came from outside. Since fellow Taoist Guifang is determined, this old monk won't say much. Please go ahead. This time, Venerable Avidya's voice became solemn and deep. Both Mo Tiange and Nia Wushang's hearts skipped a beat. Could it be that Venerable Avidya chose the second solution? If that was the case, hiding in this immortal's cave would mean certain death. Before they could communicate, they heard Guifang Demon Monarch's voice. Old monk, it seems you have some sense of responsibility. Let's go. Right after he finished speaking, one of the auras instantly went far away. The two of them heaved sighs of relief. It seemed Venerable Avidya chose the first solution. The crisis in front of them finally had nothing to do with them. Soon after, the auras at the entrance left one by one. Finally, there was no one left. Mo Tiange and Nia Wushang looked at each other. Both of them heaved long sighs of relief. This was really an unexpected disaster. Chapter 432. Guifang Demon Monarch, Venerable Wu Ming, and the others all left, but Mo Tiange and Nia Wushang were still worried about this matter. Although a late nascent soul cultivator like Guifang Demon Monarch wouldn't take them seriously, other people in Guifang City might not. It would be fine if Guifang Demon Monarch won in this trip, but if he lost, his disciples and subordinates would probably come to trouble them. The two of them didn't return to the cultivation room for a while but sat in the hall of the cave in silence. After a while, both of them were shocked and looked out of the cave. They both felt the amazing fluctuations coming from outside Guifang City. Obviously, the two late nascent soul cultivators had started to fight. The power of late nascent soul cultivators can't stop Guifang City even if there are restrictions to protect the city. Nia Wushang sighed. Even they were affected, so it could be seen how strong the spiritual pressure was when the two of them fought. Nia Wushang was right. Guifang City was in a panic because of the spiritual pressure from the two late nascent soul cultivators. Countless low-level cultivators and mortals vomited blood. Unable to control themselves, they had to hide in the formation arranged by the city lord's mansion. The high-level cultivators stopped their closed-door meditation without exception, walked out of their caves, and looked outside the city anxiously. This turmoil lasted for 3 days. 3 days later, the fluctuations outside the city finally stopped. Guifang Demon Monarch lost. Nia Wushang opened her eyes and said. Mo Tiange knew she had a treasure with her, so she was very sensitive to devil aura. Since she said so, it was most likely true. Should we leave here? Nia Wushang hesitated. It's better to find another quiet cave for closed-door meditation, but my situation is different from yours. I just advanced to the late nascent soul realm, so my devil aura is not very stable. Mo Tiange frowned. I'm fine. After I advanced, I spent some time to stabilize my realm. She pondered for a moment. In fact, we don't have to be so anxious. This matter doesn't have much to do with us. Even if someone comes to trouble us, they won't go too far. Nia Wushang answered absent-mindedly. Logically speaking, although she was already in the late stage of the core formation realm, she was of no value to Guifang Demon Lord, a cultivator in the late stage of the nascent soul realm. And with the way Guifang Demon Lord governed Guifang City, he should not vent his anger on her. His disciples and subordinates should not go too far either. If that was the case, she didn't mind enduring it for a while. Mo Tiange stared at her. She hesitated for a moment but in the end, she didn't say anything. This matter originally had nothing to do with Nia Wushang. If the two of them didn't live together, it wouldn't have implicated her. However, they had reunited in a different place and had been companions for so many years, so they already regarded each other as friends. If she apologized, it would be too formal. By the way, how did you get a Buddhist holy item? Why haven't you mentioned it all these years? Nia Wushang asked in bewilderment. Regarding this matter, Mo Tiange could only smile bitterly. If they didn't come looking for me, I really wouldn't have known that this thing was actually a Buddhist sacred object. If I knew, I definitely would have concealed my identity and hid. How could I have let them track me all the way here? Soon after, she briefly told Nia Wushang what happened 40 years ago. After figuring out the cause and effect, she wasn't surprised that the Buddhist cultivators tracked them here. That year, after she seized the inescapable net, she lived in Sky Snow City for a while, then went to Carefree Valley, Starfall City, and finally settled in Guifang City. All these years, although her whereabouts were uncertain, she never disguised herself or changed her name. She also didn't deliberately hide in public places. Since Huayan Temple was a big cultivation group, it had its own way to find her. After listening to her, Nia Wushang said, "I see. It seems that Jiewu isn't ordinary. How could an ordinary disciple casually go out with a sacred object? Moreover, he was driven out back then, but now he's following revered Wu Ming. Not only has he advanced to the core formation realm, but he's also very dignified. I'm afraid what happened back then was related to the internal strife of Huayan Temple." Mo Tiange was a disciple of a big cultivation group, so she knew more about this kind of internal strife than Nia Wushang. She could almost deduce what Jiewu experienced back then. Since she had nothing to do, she could inquire about what happened to Huayan Temple in the past. After they finished talking about this matter, the two of them didn't say anything, but neither of them had the intention to return to the cultivation room. The 5 saints and the legend of the 5 saints were originally just rumors to them. But now, such an incident happened right before their eyes, and they were almost involved in it. Mo Tiange, in particular, had a lot on her mind. She originally thought the inescapable net was an imitation, but it turned out to be the real thing. Then what about the Fuxing sword? She asked revered Wu Ming what the 5 sacred objects were because she had a strong premonition. Revered Wu Ming's answer was both within her expectations and beyond her expectations. It was within her expectations because she had a premonition that the Fuxing sword might also be one, and it turned out it really was. It was beyond her expectations because she originally thought the legend of the 5 saints was very far away from her, but it turned out she actually had 2 sacred objects. Then she immediately remembered that many people knew she had the Fuxing sword in her hands. When she exchanged for the Fuxing sword from Devil Monarch Xianyue, there were 7 cultivators in total. Those cultivators were scattered all over Yunzhong, and many of them were disciples of big cultivation groups. Not good. Mo Tiange suddenly thought of something and stood up abruptly, drenched in cold sweat. "What's wrong?" Nia Wushang looked at her in confusion. "Yang Qingji," Mo Tiange muttered. "Yang Qingji knows." Nia Wushang frowned, not understanding what she meant. "You mean Yang Qingji knows us? What's the big deal? We don't have any grudges against him, right?" "No." Mo Tiange shook her head with a pale face. Mo Tiange shook her head with a pale face. "Do you remember what the 5 holy artifacts revered Avidya mentioned just now?" "Of course I remember. In addition to the heavenly devil tower and the inescapable net, there's also the soul-restricting bead, Wu Ming Lu, and the Fuxing sword. Do you think the soul-restricting bead is the one in Ling Yunha's hands?" She thought for a moment then shook her head. "It shouldn't be, right? If the soul-restricting bead is a sacred object, how could it be taken away from the cultivation group by a core formation cultivator? I don't care whether Ling Yunha's soul-restricting bead is the one or not." Mo Tiange sat down again and held her forehead. "What I want to tell you is that the Fuxing sword is in my hands." Clang! The teacup Nia Wushang just picked up fell on the table. She suddenly looked up at Mo Tiange, narrowed her eyes, and said in disbelief, "What did you say?" "I said, one of the 5 sacred objects, the Fusheng sword, is in my hands. Mo Tiange slowly repeated, and Yang Qingji knows about this. Nia Wushang didn't need to say anything else. In an instant, her complexion turned deathly pale. In that case, they... Before she could finish, she suddenly grabbed Mo Tiange's sleeve. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go before they come. Go. Mo Tiange smiled bitterly. Guifang City is the real inescapable net with a late-stage nascent soul cultivator guarding it. Where should we go? There was still only one answer: enter the virtual sky world. But in that case, she would have to face the problem of how to explain to Nia Wushang. Upon hearing that, Nia Wushang let go of her hand dejectedly. Right. If they've already noticed us, then wait. She looked up and asked. When revered Wu Ming answered this question, Yang Qingji wasn't there, right? Right. Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment. But if revered Wu Ming knows, doesn't Guifang Demon Monarch know? Then think about it. When Yang Qingji first knew you had the Fusheng sword, did he have any special reaction? Mo Tiange thought for a moment, then shook her head. I exchanged the Fusheng sword from a devil cultivator. At that time, there were several core formation cultivators present. If they knew, how could they let me exchange it? At that time, in their eyes, the Fusheng sword was just a very useless ancient treasure that lost its former power but was still very famous. Nia Wushang breathed a sigh of relief. You see, Yang Qingji didn't know at that time, so Guifang Demon Monarch didn't tell him before. Maybe he still doesn't know? Mo Tiange pondered silently. During this period of time, it was really hard to say whether Guifang Demon Monarch told Yang Qingji or not. In the past few decades, the Heavenly Devil Tower caused turmoil in the whole of Yunzhong, and the legend of the 5 saints of Yunzhong became widely known. Under such circumstances, the 5 sacred objects, which were originally very secretive, became an interesting anecdote passed by word of mouth among Yunzhong cultivators. It wasn't impossible for those late nascent soul cultivators who knew the secret to tell their juniors about it. No, if Yang Qingji knew the Fusheng sword was one of the 5 sacred objects and she was in Guifang City, how could he have waited until now and not come to ask for it? That meant Yang Qingji most likely didn't know about this. Thinking up to this point, Mo Tiange felt a little relieved. Up until now, no one had come to trouble her. At the very least, it showed that the several cultivators who knew she had the Fusheng sword didn't know it was one of the 5 sacred objects. However, this incident reminded her of something. Those people didn't know now, but what about in the future? Among those 7 people, there were many disciples from big cultivation groups, and among them were people like Han Shizhi, who was both scheming and had a high status. It was very likely they would participate in the secret affairs of their cultivation groups. At that time, if they knew she had the Fusheng sword, they definitely wouldn't be polite and would go to her door to snatch it. In that case, I should be safe for the time being. But now, I have to disguise myself and hide my identity. Seeing that Mo Tiange understood, Nia Wushang also relaxed and said with a smile, You still want to hide your identity? Even your name is fake. Mo Tiange also smiled. She really didn't use her real name much outside. When she was young, she changed her name to Yi Xiaotian because of her father's clan. After she came to Yunzhong, the name Qin Wei came from her Daoist name. Although she wasn't the same as before, she never lost the sense of crisis she had when she was young. In fact, you don't have to worry too much. I know a little about disguise, so I can teach you. After this matter is over, you should leave Guifang City as soon as possible, disguise yourself and hide in the secular world. Presumably, they won't be able to find you no matter how strong they are. And based on the current situation, this was already a relatively good method. Mo Tiange thought about it and sighed. Inescapable net is fine. I got it by accident, and it was the original owner who came to ask for it, so I'll just hand it over. However, I got this Fusheng sword fair and square, so I'm really not willing to let them have it so easily. Otherwise, as long as I handed the thing over, I wouldn't have anything to do with it. Nia Wushang curled her lips. What are you talking about? You're good at everything, but you're too unambitious. If there's something good, it'll be a waste not to take it, and it'll be a waste not to snatch it. Whoever is stronger and luckier will get it. Unless it's absolutely necessary, why should I give it to them? Mo Tiange smiled bitterly. Although she had left Master Song Feng, Nia Wushang's way of thinking was deeply influenced by Master Song Feng, who was much more overbearing than her. In fact, she didn't want to give it to them, but she was more afraid of trouble. In any case, as long as the Fuxing sword was in her hands, danger would always follow her. After a few days, if Guifang Demon Monarch didn't come to trouble her, she could leave Guifang City. In addition, she also had to find a chance to go to Nanzhou and see Venerable Avidya. When she handed the inescapable net to Venerable Avidya, she still had a question she wanted to ask, but it wasn't convenient for her to say it out loud, so she just transmitted her voice to him, saying she would ask him in private. Later, Guifang Demon Monarch just happened to arrive, so Venerable Avidya didn't answer. However, since she handed over the inescapable net so straightforwardly and didn't make any excessive requests, Venerable Avidya presumably wouldn't refuse. Just as she thought about this, Nia Wushang suddenly raised her eyebrows and said, "Someone's coming." Chapter 433. The aura was getting closer and closer. The newcomer didn't seem to have any intention of hiding his tracks and just walked slowly towards their cave. He was in the middle stage of the core formation realm, and he was alone. Yang Qingji? Mo Tiange and Nia Wushang looked at each other and guessed at the same time. The answer was soon revealed. Yang Qingji's voice came from outside. "Fellow Taoists, old friends, meet again. You don't mind meeting me, right?" Yang Qingji's real voice was clear and a little sharp, but his attitude was always so arrogant. His voice, which was supposed to be pleasant to listen to, always had a hint of impatience in it, which made people unhappy. Nia Wushang asked with her eyes. Mo Tiange pondered for a while then nodded. Yang Qingji coming alone was already very clear. He shouldn't be looking for trouble. Although they didn't have any friendship with Yang Qingji, they didn't have any grudges either. After Mo Tiange removed the restriction, Nia Wushang opened the cave. Yang Qingji was standing outside, dressed in black, without a mask, and without any magic weapon in his hands. Seeing the two of them, he first nodded to Mo Tiange. "Fellow Taoist Qin." Mo Tiange smiled. He was so casual, so she didn't salute him. "Fellow Taoist Yang, long time no see." Then Yang Qingji's gaze fell on Nia Wushang. His eyes were cold. After staring for a while, he said, "You must be fellow Taoist Tian Can, right?" "I didn't know fellow Taoist Tian Can was a woman disguised as a man." Nia Wushang wasn't wearing a mask or a disguise, so her gender was obvious at first glance. She also didn't want to hide it anymore. That day in Carefree Valley, she just happened to disguise herself to avoid being tracked by Tianyan sect. It wasn't intentional. "Fellow Taoist Yang has a good eye," Nia Wushang said faintly, not intending to oppose him. In Carefree Valley, she only mocked Yang Qingji because she disliked his behavior. She really didn't need to remember such a trivial matter until now. Unfortunately, Yang Qingji obviously didn't think so. He raised the corner of his mouth, looking like he was smiling, but his eyes were gloomy and his voice was full of sarcasm. "I really can't tell. Fellow Taoist Tian Can not only has a fake appearance, but also a fake gender and cultivation level. You're obviously a devil cultivator, but your disguise is so flawless. I just don't know if his name and identity are also fake." Upon hearing such provocative words, Nia Wushang just indifferently glanced at him and said, "Whether it's true or false, what does it have to do with fellow Taoist Yang? If fellow Taoist Yang is so free, why don't you think about how to take back the sacred object?" Yang Qingji was fuming with anger at her attitude. She was clearly mocking him for not doing his job properly. It was childish and ridiculous. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. She hadn't seen him for several decades, but why was this fellow Taoist Yang still so angry? Aside from mocking her a few times, Nia Wushang hadn't really offended him. Fellow Taoist Yang. She promptly interrupted, it's been many years since we last met. I wonder if fellow Taoist has any important matters to discuss with me this time? Hearing her voice, Yang Qingji became a little more rational, and he said lightly, you two have been in Guifang City for many years, but I didn't know. Today, I specially came to pay a visit. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have any objections, right? Mo Tiange paused for a moment then said, of course I don't have any objections. He thought to himself, why are Yang Qingji's words so unpleasant? If you want to visit, then visit. Would it kill you to say some polite words? Fellow Taoist Yang, please come in. This immortal's cave is simple and crude, so I'm sorry for not being a good host. Please don't take offense. Hearing what Mo Tiange said, Yang Qingji swaggered into the immortal's cave and sat down. He still didn't say any polite words. However, no matter how rude he was, Mo Tiange didn't mind. It was fine as long as he didn't come for the supporting sword. The three of them sat down. Yang Qingji sized up this simple immortal's cave with a critical gaze. Nia Wushang was bored, and Mo Tiange was full of doubts. After a while, Yang Qingji finally finished sizing up the place. He picked up the teacup and took a sip then said, fellow Taoists, since you came to Guifang City, why didn't you come to say hello? If it weren't for this coincidence, I wouldn't have known you two were here. Mo Tiange smiled and said, presumably, your master has already investigated. When fellow Taoist Tian Can and I came here, we were both injured and were looking for a place to recuperate. Later, Yinzhong was in chaos, so it wasn't convenient for us to disturb you. Yang Qingji looked a little uncomfortable when he heard the word, investigated. He said he came to visit, but in fact, he was ordered by his master to see if there was anything unusual about these two people. After all, things like Buddhist sacred objects were obtained from them, so he had to be cautious. While he was drinking tea with his head lowered, he secretly glanced at Mo Tiange and Nia Wushang. He only felt relieved when he found that their expressions were normal, as if this kind of thing was common and they didn't care about it at all. However, he was thinking too much. Not to mention that they didn't have any friendship. Even if they did, it wouldn't be a big deal for them to come and probe them when they encountered such a big event. Mo Tiange and Nia Wushang were used to it, so why would they care? This also showed that although Yang Qingji's master was complicated, he himself didn't understand the ways of the world. Fellow Taoist Yang. Since Yang Qingji didn't say anything for a long time, Mo Tiange had to break the silence first. We haven't seen each other for 40 years since we parted at Carefree Valley. I didn't expect you to advance to the middle stage smoothly. Congratulations. Yang Qingji said uncomfortably, why are you so polite, fellow Taoist Qin? If you want to congratulate me, it's the two of you who advanced to the late stage. My achievement isn't worth mentioning. Mo Tiange said with a smile, how is it the same? Fellow Taoist Tian Can and I have been hiding in Guifang City all these years and haven't gone out to gain experience. On the contrary, fellow Taoist Yang not only escaped from the turmoil in Heavenly Devil Tower, but also advanced. This is much better than us cultivating in seclusion. Although it was a compliment, Mo Tiange wasn't talking nonsense. They hadn't seen the situation in Yunzhong in the past few decades, but they knew how tragic it was from the news outside. It wasn't easy for Yang Qingji to survive in this kind of turmoil and even advance successfully. Yang Qingji's expression became a lot better after hearing this. He showed a slight smile and said, fellow Taoists, you're busy, so I won't waste your time. In fact, I came here for two reasons. First, I reunited with an old friend, so I came to visit. Second, fellow Taoist Qin actually has a Buddhist sacred object in your hands. I'm very curious, so. I see. Mo Tiange's expression was calm. She said with a smile, in fact, I also think this matter is very inconceivable. If Huayan Temple hadn't come looking for me, I wouldn't have known I had a precious treasure. Alas, I had a precious treasure but didn't know it. When I found out, I had to hand it over. It's obvious that this thing really doesn't belong to me. It's useless to ask for more. When she said this, Mo Tiange looked regretful and deeply regretful. Seeing that she didn't seem to be pretending, Yang Qingji couldn't help but sympathize with her. He said, "Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have to feel too regretful. The Heavenly Devil Tower alone caused several decades of turmoil in Yunzhong and countless cultivators died. It's clear that sometimes having a precious treasure isn't a good thing. Cultivators like us don't have enough strength to hold this kind of magic weapon, so it's better to hand it over. Otherwise, it's not worth it to lose our lives." Fellow Taoist Yang is right. Mo Tiange readily agreed. If I didn't think that way, I also wouldn't have been willing to hand over this treasure. Who told us to have low cultivation levels? There are some things we can only endure. It's good that fellow Taoist Qin can think things through. When Yang Qingji said this, his tone was a bit awkward. Once he finished speaking, he impatiently asked, "May I know how fellow Taoist Qin obtained this Buddhist holy relic?" Mo Tiange already knew she had to explain everything, so she didn't waste any time. She told them what happened 40 years ago. In the end, she said, "Speaking of which, not long after, I met fellow Taoist Yang, but I don't know if fellow Taoist Yang was in Sky Snow City at that time." "I see." Yang Qingji felt it was a pity. At that time, he seemed to be rushing to Sky Snow City, but unfortunately, he almost missed the holy relic. However, even if he ran into it, it would have been useless. At that time, he had no idea this thing was one of the 5 holy relic. Feeling there was nothing to ask about this matter, Yang Qingji changed the subject. "May I know what fellow Taoists plan to do next?" Seeing that Yang Qingji didn't ask any more questions, Mo Tiange breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "What else can I do? Fellow Taoist Yang also knows I'm not from Yunzhong. If it weren't for the turmoil in Yunzhong these past few decades, I would have left and returned to my hometown. Now that the turmoil has gradually subsided, I'll leave as soon as I finish dealing with my own affairs. Oh, I forgot. Speaking of which, fellow Taoist Qin, you've been in Yunzhong for a long time. You haven't returned for a long time. You must miss your family very much, right?" "Yes." Mo Tiange's eyes were filled with longing. "Maybe they'll come to Yunzhong. What about fellow Taoist Tian Can?" Yang Qingji shifted his gaze to Nie Wushang. "Why haven't you spoken?" Nie Wushang seemed to be lost in thought. Upon hearing his voice, she glanced at him and said faintly, "I don't like to talk." "What do you want to ask, fellow Taoist Yang?" Yang Qingji frowned slightly and repeated his question. "May I know what fellow Taoist Tian Can plans to do next? Do you want to leave Guifang City?" Nie Wushang was silent for a moment before she answered, "I can't answer fellow Taoist Yang for the time being. I've always done things as I please. I might leave tomorrow, or I might stay here for a few more years." She really couldn't make up her mind. Although the matter of the Buddhist holy relic had nothing to do with them, it was hard to say what consequences it would have. But if she left in her current state, it wouldn't be appropriate. Seeing that the atmosphere was a bit strange, Mo Tiange smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Yang only asked about us, but I wonder what your plans are? We've been in Guifang City all these years. I heard you're the disciple most likely to advance to the nascent soul realm under your master, and you're very valued. Once you advance to the nascent soul realm, you might inherit the position of the city lord. It's really worth celebrating." When this matter was brought up, Yang Qingji didn't look happy at all. He said faintly, "Fellow Taoist Qin is considerate. Unfortunately, this isn't what I want." Upon hearing his words and tone, Mo Tiange really wanted to step on Yang Qingji's face. Even if he still looked like a teenager, he was already a core formation cultivator. No matter how young he was, he'd lived for more than 100 years. Could it be that he didn't know how to say polite words? This time, she didn't feel like replying. The 3 of them sat in silence for a while. Yang Qingji finally realized the atmosphere wasn't right. He looked at Imo Tiange, then looked at Nia Wushang. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he swallowed his words and said gloomily, "Fellow Taoists, it seems you have something to do, so I'll take my leave first. I'll visit you again later if I have the chance." Upon hearing what he said, Imo Tiange and Nia Wushang finally smiled and stood up to see him off. "Fellow Taoist Yang, please go ahead. We'll meet again if there's a chance." Yang Qingji looked at Nia Wushang's rare smile and felt even more depressed. He casually cupped his hands, then stood up to leave. Chapter 434. Yang Qingji's visit basically showed Guifang demon monarch's attitude. The Buddhist sacred object was no longer in Imo Tiange's hands, so the two of them had no value to Guifang demon monarch. Since Yang Qingji didn't say anything, they shouldn't have any trouble. Imo Tiange breathed a sigh of relief, but she wasn't completely relieved. She still had the Fusheng sword, so she had to hide her traces as soon as possible before others found out. Nia Wushang also understood this, so she hurriedly taught her some disguising techniques and taught her the appearance mimicking technique. The so-called appearance mimicking technique was actually a kind of illusion technique. This kind of technique could even fool high-level cultivators, but Nia Wushang said that since it was a technique, it could be cracked. Although her technique could be regarded as high-level, it probably couldn't fool late-stage, nascent soul cultivators. For this reason, Nia Wushang especially told her that it'd be best for her to master the art of disguise as soon as possible. The crudest method was also the one that was the hardest to crack. If she could dress herself up perfectly, it wouldn't matter how strong other people's divine senses were. Imo Tiange agreed to each of her instructions, then she bid farewell to Nia Wushang and quietly left Guifang city. Of course, Guifang demon monarch must have known about this. However, she was useless now, so no one came to stop her. She boldly left Guifang city, fled east for several hundred miles, and entered the complex mountain range of northern Lin country. There were neither outstanding spirit veins nor dense devil aura here. Except for a few low-level cultivators, there was no one else here. Imo Tiange carefully paid attention to her back. After finding no traces of others, she entered the virtual sky world and disguised herself according to Nia Wushang's instructions. She stayed in the virtual sky world for several days. Even if someone really followed her, they should have left, so Imo Tiange left the virtual sky world. At this time, she already looked like a young scholar. Although Nia Wushang said her appearance mimicking technique couldn't fool late-stage nascent soul cultivators, Imo Tiange still used it. First, she was a bit shorter than Nia Wushang, which made it easy for her to arouse suspicion if she disguised as a man, but it was basically useless if she disguised as a woman. Second, she had the spirit-concealing pendant, which, when used with the appearance-mimicking technique, might be able to fool high-level cultivators. Besides, late-stage nascent soul cultivators were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. There were only 4 or 5 in the celestial pole. Even if there were more in Yunzhong than in the celestial pole, there were at most 10 or so. How could they be encountered so easily? As long as she did not reveal the matter of the Fusheng sword, no one would see her even if she wanted to. After transforming, Imo Tiange swaggered out of the northern Qilin country's mountain range and entered the market. She didn't hide her cultivation level. Although core formation cultivators were high-level cultivators in Yunzhong, they weren't rare. This way, she could avoid being disturbed by low-level cultivators. Once she returned to Eastern Tang, she randomly chose a cultivation town near the sea and inquired about the South Pole Island. Sure enough, very few people knew about the South Pole Island. After asking many people, a cultivator who had just returned from the North Pole Island told her that the South Pole Island had already sunk. This news was the same as several years ago. It seemed that the miracle didn't happen. The South Pole Island really disappeared. Imo Tiange had long been mentally prepared for this, so she wasn't too depressed. She quickly pulled herself together and continued to inquire about information. Actually, she could have gone to the Joyan sect to ask for information while she was collecting the debt from Ling Yunhe. Or she could have gone to Nanzhou's Baifu Mountain and asked revered Wu Ming for advice. However, she didn't dare to rashly reveal her identity because of the Fuxing sword, so she could only put this matter aside for the time being. Deepwater City was a small city located on the edge of the North Sea. In terms of size, it was only slightly bigger than an ordinary town. In terms of power, there was only one small and medium-sized cultivation group with an early-stage nascent soul cultivator in the surrounding area. However, this small city was very prosperous because it happened to be located on the edge of the North Sea, across the sea from the North Pole Island. No matter how rich a place was, a teleportation formation was still too expensive for low-grade cultivators. Thus, crossing the sea became their choice. Moreover, there were many low-level sea beasts in the sea area near Deepwater City, so some low-level cultivators made a living by hunting beasts in the vicinity. Relying on these low-level cultivators, Deepwater City gradually prospered and became a small beast core trading market on the edge of the North Sea. Over time, even some high-level cultivators who were too lazy to go to the North Pole Island would come to Deepwater City to look for some special beast cores. The tea house in Deepwater City was particularly lively today. Most of the cultivators coming and going in a city were of the same standard. For a small city like Deepwater City, there wouldn't be many cultivators above the core formation realm coming and going like some big cities. Usually, only foundation building cultivators were in charge of the tea house in Deepwater City. Occasionally, a core formation cultivator would come and collect beast cores, which was why the tea house would be lively for a while. However, today's grand occasion wasn't like the past, which was caused by core formation cultivators collecting beast cores. Brother, make way, make way. A youngster in the fifth layer of the aura refining realm squeezed in from outside the tea house and shouted at the cultivator in front of him, "Excuse me, excuse me." The cultivator in front of him was unwilling to give way and only said, "Brother, first come, first served." The youngster blinked and said in puzzlement, "Brother, it only takes a while to appraise the beast cores, right? You've been crowding around here for a long time. Aren't you just here to watch the show? Beast cores?" The cultivator was surprised. "Didn't you inquire clearly? This time, we're not here to collect beast cores." Huh? The youngster was puzzled. "Didn't we just hear that a core formation senior came to our Deepwater City? If he's not here to collect beast cores, what else is he here for?" A small city like Deepwater City was destined to have no high-level cultivators staying here. Those high-level cultivators were either just passing by or coming to collect special beast cores. There had never been an exception. Those who really wanted to collect high-level beast cores or hunt high-level sea beasts would directly teleport to North Pole Island, who would come to Deepwater City. Before the cultivator could answer, someone next to him interrupted, "Fellow Daoist, didn't you inquire about this before you came? This senior isn't here to collect beast cores, he's here to collect anecdotes." Huh? The youngster was surprised. What's going on? Anecdotes? He couldn't be blamed for being so surprised. When they first heard about this, everyone had the same reaction. Which high-level cultivator wasn't busy with cultivation? What anecdotes? What was the use of hearing them? This senior said he's collecting these anecdotes to explore some secret places. Some things aren't strange just by looking at them, but if he collects them all together, he might be able to find some wonderful places. His cultivation has reached a bottleneck, so he's traveling everywhere to collect anecdotes, hoping to find some clues that might help him break through the bottleneck. So that's how it is. The youngster was suddenly enlightened. He touched his head and said, "These seniors with profound cultivation levels really think more clearly than us. Isn't that so? If this senior didn't tell me, I would have never thought about it." The first cultivator agreed. The two of them chatted for a while and got a little closer to each other. The cultivator pulled the youngster forward and said, "Let's just listen here. This senior is very generous. As long as you tell him some rumors, he'll accept any medicinal pills or spirit stones he wants. If someone asks for guidance, he won't refuse. Let's listen on the side. Maybe we'll gain something. Right after he said that, another person next to him made a gesture of silence and said in a low voice, "This senior is going to talk. Don't make a sound." The cultivator promptly shut his mouth and listened attentively. After a while, a gentle male voice was heard. "There's nothing wrong with your cultivation level. What's wrong is your state of mind. Every time you advance, aside from improving your cultivation level, your understanding of the Tao scriptures teachings will also go one step further. Put down your cultivation for the time being and walk around. Once your understanding of the scriptures teachings has gone one step further, you can go back and cultivate." The foundation building cultivator sitting on the other side of the long table was startled. He carefully savored it and suddenly understood. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your guidance, Senior. Junior finally understands." On the other side of the long table, the gentle young scholar waved his hand and said, "This is your reward. No need to thank me." He then looked behind the foundation building cultivator and asked, "Is there anyone else?" Me. Someone immediately squeezed in from behind. It was a man in his 30s, dressed in short clothes, and his cultivation level was in the aura refining realm. At first glance, it was obvious that he was a low-level individual cultivator who hunted sea beasts for a living in Deep Water City. If it was under other circumstances, he definitely wouldn't dare to be so presumptuous in front of a foundation-building cultivator. However, this core formation senior said that regardless of cultivation level, as long as the information he provided was valuable, he could exchange it for a reward. When the foundation-building cultivator saw this man leaning against him, he frowned. However, there was a core formation senior in front of him. Moreover, this senior had been smiling and didn't show the slightest bit of impatience, so he could only endure it. He cupped his hands and bowed to this senior before pushing the crowd aside and leaving the tea house. "Sit." The young scholar pointed at the seat in front of him and said, "Do you have any news?" The man cautiously sat down and glanced at the young scholar. A nervous expression appeared on his face and he timidly extended his hand. "Senior, Junior doesn't have any news, but Junior has a strange treasure in my hands. I want to show it to Senior. Are you interested?" The more he spoke, the softer his voice became. In the end, he consciously stopped talking and looked at the young man in front of him with unease. This senior clearly said he came here to collect strange news and not to exchange for items. His behavior was already considered a violation of the rules. If this senior got angry, then sure enough, when he heard what he said, the young scholar slightly furrowed his brows. However, in the next moment, his gaze still fell on the man's hand. This was a translucent red, sparkling and translucent stone that emitted a faint spiritual aura. For aura refining cultivators, this was indeed a treasure. However, for a core formation cultivator, this spiritual aura was a bit too weak. The young scholar was about to speak when he suddenly noticed something. He reached out and picked up the stone in the man's hand. After carefully examining it, he said, "This is fire obsidian. It can't be considered too valuable and it's also a bit too small. However, its quality isn't bad, so it has some value." Hearing what he said, the man was delighted and promptly nodded. "Senior has good eyes. When I took this stone to the shop to sell, they were only willing to pay 10 spirit stones. The shopkeeper didn't know what it was, so I never sold it. Senior, do you want it?" The young scholar thought for a moment then said, "This thing is somewhat useful to me, so there's no harm in taking it. 10 spirit stones is indeed a bit low. With this kind of quality, it's probably worth about 100 spirit stones. Take a look, do you want spirit stones or medicinal pills?" "About 100 spirit stones." The man was overjoyed. For a low-level cultivator like him, 100 spirit stones wasn't a small amount. However, when he looked at the several jade bottles and piles of spirit stones on the table, he gulped and cautiously said, "Senior, can I exchange them for medicinal pills?" The young scholar nodded. "Of course you can." As he said that, he pushed one of the jade bottles towards the man. This bottle of medicinal pills is for aura refining cultivators to take. This bottle is worth about 180 spirit stones, so the value is about the same. Take it. Thank you, senior, thank you, senior. The man grabbed the jade bottle, put it into his chinkuan bag, and repeatedly expressed his thanks. The young scholar waved his hand. Go. Then he raised his voice and said, Is there anyone else? Me. Me. Seeing the man's encounter, some low-level cultivators who were originally just watching the fun also came forward. This senior was good-natured and generous. If they could exchange some medicinal pills worth a few spirit stones with him, they would definitely make a profit. Chapter 435. At sunset, the cultivators surrounding the tea house in Deepwater City finally dispersed in groups of 2s and 3s. The tea house's manager, an old cultivator with a grizzled beard who was still in the early stage of the foundation building realm, came forward and asked respectfully, Senior, it's getting late. Do you need me to arrange a place for you? The young scholar stretched himself, picked up the folding fan on the table, and said, I'm looking for a place to stay. Sorry for troubling you. I don't dare. The manager hurriedly stepped aside. Senior's guidance has enlightened Junior. It's Junior's honor to do something for Senior. The manager was so respectful because before he came here, he gave this cultivator some pointers, allowing this cultivator who didn't have much time left to live to feel the meaning of cultivation again. For cultivators, even if their lifespans were about to end, it was a good thing if their cultivation level could advance. Maybe they could have a breakthrough with a moment of enlightenment and some other opportunities. Our tea house has a place for distinguished guests to rest. If Senior doesn't mind, you can rest here. What do you think? The young man nodded with a smile, expressing his agreement. When the shopkeeper saw this, he respectfully invited him into the backyard, and as he walked, he said, Senior, there's a small courtyard behind us, and it's usually for distinguished guests to stay in. Senior will absolutely not be disturbed here. The young man smiled. That would be best. The manager led the young man to the small courtyard in the back. After a brief introduction, seeing that the young man was satisfied, the manager finally retreated with relief. Retreating to the entrance of the courtyard, the shopkeeper saw that an extremely powerful restriction had been set up in the courtyard. He wiped his sweat and said, Senior, you don't look old, but your cultivation is so high. You are truly a genius. When the surrounding restrictions were completely opened, the young man touched the space between his eyebrows, summoning a sparkling and translucent bead. After several breaths, he suddenly disappeared from the room. This young man was naturally Mo Tiange. After entering the virtual sky world, Mo Tiange withdrew the appearance-mimicking technique and restored her original appearance. She then sat on a praying mat and closed her eyes to rest. Nia Wushang's appearance-mimicking technique was indeed extraordinary. After transforming, even she herself couldn't recognize her, let alone these low-level cultivators. With the strengthening effect of the spirit-concealing pendant, she reckoned even middle-stage, nascent soul cultivators wouldn't be able to see through her disguise. This was enough. It was not easy to see a late nascent soul cultivator. After resting for a while and feeling full of energy, Mo Tiange took out a small bag and poured out a pile of things. This was her harvest for the day. Although it was not valuable, there were some peculiar things that were rather interesting. After all, there weren't many strange things. Many low-level cultivators exchanged some rare items with her. She found the items quite interesting, so she exchanged them. In any case, what these cultivators wanted were mostly medicinal pills for aura refining or foundation building cultivators, or low-grade spirit tools and magic tools. To her, those were the most useless things. Even if she wanted to sell them, she'd find it troublesome. Mo Tiange picked up a fiery red stone from the pile of things. This was the fire obsidian stone that was exchanged from the hands of a low-level cultivator. Because of this incident, those low-level cultivators, regardless of whether they had valuable items in their hands or not, would just take out their items to exchange with her. In fact, there was nothing special about this fire obsidian stone. With this quality, it could only be sold for about 100 spirit stones in the celestial pole. Although it wasn't cheap, it wasn't rare either. The reason why she made the exchange was because she had never seen this thing since she arrived in Yunzhong. When she went shopping in Guifang City, a shop assistant told her he had never seen this thing before. Only then did she realize that fire obsidian might be a specialty of the celestial pole and couldn't be found in Yunzhong. But now, she actually saw this thing in the hands of a low-level cultivator. Furthermore, these cultivators didn't know what this thing was, so this was a bit strange. This was the seaside, and this sea area was the natural moat between the celestial pole and Yunzhong. If fire obsidian was really a specialty of the celestial pole, didn't that mean someone crossed the South Sea and lost fire obsidian here? Of course, this was only a guess. She had no way of knowing the truth. In addition, it wasn't like she didn't gain anything today. Although most of the so-called strange things in this small town were trivial matters, with so many people here, there were bound to be some people who heard some ancient legends. For example, an old aura refining cultivator whose lifespan was about to run out told her that when he was a child, he once heard a story about a celestial mountain appearing in the sea from his elders. Mo Tiange originally thought it was just a mirage, so she didn't pay too much attention to it. However, after listening to the old cultivator's story, she finally realized it wasn't that simple. The old cultivator said that at that time, all the fishermen and cultivators who hunted sea beasts for a living saw that celestial mountain. It suddenly appeared like a small island and someone crossed the sea from it to trade some things with them. However, the seaside residents couldn't approach this celestial mountain. There seemed to be a dense fog around it, preventing people from advancing. Experienced cultivators said this was an illusory formation. This celestial mountain existed for about half a month before it disappeared as if it had never appeared. Mo Tiange thought about it carefully and felt that this so-called celestial mountain was very likely a high-level cultivator's magic weapon. An independent space like the virtual sky world was admittedly a heaven-defying existence that even deification cultivators would find difficult to obtain. However, portable immortals caves weren't that rare. It was just that they cost a lot, so very few people had them. These portable immortals caves were usually made to look like magic weapons. After they were used, they would turn into something, a mountain, a tower, a boat, or even a house. After they transformed, their owners could move in. The principle was also very simple. Many cultivators in the core formation realm and above used flying magic weapons that weren't conspicuous when taken out. Once they were used, they would turn into carriages or boats. For example, Lord Daoist Jinghe's cloud carriage was such a magic weapon. However, such a portable immortals cave was much more expensive than a cloud carriage. Even for a cultivation group disciple like her who didn't lack spirit stones, it was still a sky-high price. Even Lord Daoist Jinghe probably wouldn't be willing to part with it. In addition, the required materials and techniques were also very rare. Even if one could afford it, there might not be anyone who could make it. Therefore, many high-level cultivators knew about this thing, but very few people had it. Why couldn't the spirit stones used to make a portable immortals cave be used for something else? Buying medicinal pills and materials could greatly improve one's cultivation level. What was the use of such a portable immortals cave without the support of spirit veins? It would cost a lot of spirit stones to maintain it on a daily basis. Its function was nothing more than making it more convenient to go out. In short, this thing cost a lot, but the benefits weren't very high. Unless one was extremely rich, very few people would make such a thing. The immortal mountain this old cultivator mentioned was very likely a high-level cultivator's portable immortals cave. He came here, stayed for several days, then left again. However, it was unclear whether this high-level cultivator came from the South Sea or if he was a local cultivator from Yunzhong who passed through here. After she sorted out the information she heard today, Mo Tiange regretfully discovered that there wasn't much valuable information. However, she was already mentally prepared for this, so she wasn't too disappointed. If the clues to return to the celestial pole were so easy to find, how could there have been no contact between the celestial pole and Yunzhong for so many years? Besides, the shortcut to return to the celestial pole wasn't necessarily at the seaside. Transporting formations, space cracks, and the like didn't have a concept of distance. For example, the undersea path Mo Yaoqing found could be said to be God's good fortune. It was already not easy to find one. With that thought in mind, Mo Tiange decided to stay in Deep Water City for 3 to 5 days and then go south. She would go to all the major cultivation towns in eastern Tang, then she would go to Nanzhou and the west. The west of Yunzhong had never been included in the sphere of influence because the west was barren and there were almost no spirit veins. There were only many barbarians and small countries. However, Mo Tiange didn't want to let go of any opportunities. If she still couldn't find any clues in Nanzhou, she could go to the west. After all, the more backward a place was, the more legends there were. Just like that, Mo Tiange adjusted her breath in the virtual sky world for one night. The next day, Mo Tiange, still in the appearance of a young scholar, went out of the small courtyard where she temporarily lived, set up a table and chairs in the tea house, and began to collect strange news. After the first day of spreading the news, more people came today. However, most of them didn't have anything valuable in their hands. Although Mo Tiange didn't mind exchanging with low-level cultivators, she didn't accept everything. She rejected the ordinary things one by one and only accepted some novel and interesting things. These cultivators originally came to try their luck. Although they were somewhat disappointed, they didn't think much of it and continued to watch the fun from the side. In addition to these low-level aura refining cultivators, there were also some foundation-building cultivators who heard yesterday's news and came to ask for advice. Most of these people offered 1 or 2 valuable things or mentioned some information, which made Mo Tiange gain quite a lot. She also knew that most of these foundation-building cultivators didn't have high aptitudes and only advanced to the foundation-building realm after going through untold hardships. They usually didn't have anyone to guide them, so they took a lot of detours, just like Second Uncle. When she thought of Second Uncle, she was even more kind to these foundation-building cultivators and wouldn't be stingy if she could give them a few pointers. Several days later, although there were still a lot of people watching the fun, the number of aura-refining cultivators who came to exchange for things decreased. On the contrary, there were more and more foundation-building cultivators. In such a small city, there naturally weren't many foundation-building cultivators among the individual cultivators. Most of these people were disciples from small cultivation groups and schools nearby. Some only had 1 or 2 core formation elders, and some cultivation groups didn't have any core formation cultivators at all. Usually, they didn't have anyone to guide them in their cultivation. When they learned that a senior came to Deep Water City, they all took the opportunity to come and ask for advice. Some people even prepared generous gifts, wanting to invite her to their homes as guests. Regarding this, Mo Tiange naturally refused. She didn't rely on her high cultivation level to make money. These foundation-building cultivators also knew that it wasn't practical for such a senior with a profound cultivation level to come to their cultivation group as a guest, so they didn't insist. They still offered generous gifts as long as she gave them some pointers. Regarding this, Mo Tiange wasn't polite and didn't hide anything. She accepted the gifts and gave them her advice with all her might. Later on, some core formation cultivators came to invite her. Mo Tiange still refused to go to their homes as guests, but she politely chatted with these core formation cultivators in the VIP tea rooms and traded goods with them. In the process, she made many new friends. Just like that, she stayed in Deep Water City for 7 or 8 days before she finally finished everything and set off again. Chapter 436. In the blink of an eye, another 10 years had passed. In these 10 years, Mo Tiange traveled all over Yunzhong. Starting from the small town in the north, she visited all the towns and cities in eastern Tang State that were just beginning to take shape. She then went to Nanzhou State and witnessed the peculiar phenomenon of Buddhism and Confucianism coexisting. Finally, she went to the west and lived in the barbarian land for several years. She made friends with those barbarians and heard many strange legends. During these 10 years, she used the name Yi Xiaotian to make a name for herself. Most of the high-level cultivators in eastern Tang and Nanzhou were friends with her. They all said she had a profound cultivation level, was straightforward, and was a person worth befriending. Some people coveted her because she was young and had a lot of treasures, but they were all killed by her. 10 years passed in a flash. She suddenly looked back and found that her gains from traveling in Yunzhong in these 10 years were more than her gains from cultivating in the virtual sky world in several decades. The more places she went, the more things she heard. Now, her understanding of Yunzhong was much deeper than many cultivators in Yunzhong. 10 years of trials and tribulations and 10 years of experience broadened her horizons and unexpectedly gave her a deeper understanding of Mo Yaoqing's cultivation experience. Back then, Mo Yaoqing's cultivation level was completely destroyed. She hid in the secular world and wandered in Yunzhong. She suffered a lot and finally reached the nascent soul realm. This experience gave her a lot of insights, which she wrote down in her cultivation notes. Although Mo Tiange experienced a lot in the past, she didn't have as deep an understanding as Mo Yaoqing. It wasn't until now, when she walked the path Mo Yaoqing once walked, saw the things Mo Yaoqing saw, and heard the legends Mo Yaoqing heard, that experience slowly integrated into her thoughts and became her own. Mo Tiange was originally a person with excellent aptitude and a very stable mind. She also didn't lack panaceas. After integrating these experiences, even if she only cultivated step by step every day and didn't enter closed-door meditation, her cultivation level still progressed at a rapid pace. During these 10 years, her cultivation level in the late stage of the core formation realm not only stabilized, but also reached the peak of the late stage. She was only a step away from the peak stage of the core formation realm. Having reached this realm, Mo Tiange was no longer in a hurry. As long as nothing unexpected happened and she continued to cultivate steadily, it was inevitable for her to form her nascent soul before she was 200 years old. At that time, she could rely on her tyrannical strength to cross the South Sea and return to the celestial pole. In the past 10 years, as expected, she didn't find a shortcut to return to the celestial pole. For this reason, she could only make plans. If there was still no hope at the last moment, she would cross the South Sea by force. With this goal in mind, she spent the next few years inquiring about the South Sea. The South Sea of the Celestial Pole was also known as the North Sea in Yunzhong, and very few people knew about it. Although this sea wasn't as mysterious as the Sea of Returning Ruins, it was far more dangerous. Even the core formation cultivators who were on good terms with her didn't know much about it. There were a few seniors who had seen the dangers of the sea, but when they mentioned it, they all shook their heads. They said that if one wasn't a nascent soul cultivator with profound cultivation, they would most likely not be able to return safely after entering the sea. Mo Tiange didn't give up hope. After a few years, she didn't gain nothing. For example, there was a kind of tree in Yunzhong called ironheart wood. This tree grew for 1,000 years and turned into black ironheart wood. This black ironheart wood was extremely tough. Not only was it impervious to ordinary iron, but even spells couldn't harm it. If it was used as a boat, it could resist gales and huge waves. After learning about this, she went deep into the land of the western continent and finally found a black ironheart wood. She pondered about casting this wood into a boat. In addition to her own affairs, the situation in Yunzhong changed in the past 10 years was also quite interesting. First, Mount Baifu seized the holy relic, the inescapable net, and its momentum rose greatly. Second, Jillian Sek's holy relic, the soul-restraining bead, began to be known by everyone. Third, Nameless bead appeared not long ago, which caused another competition. So, together with the Heavenly Devil Tower from several decades ago, 4 out of the 5 holy relic appeared one after another. Because of this, the news that the 5th holy relic was the Fusheng sword was no longer a secret. Several core formation cultivators who saw the Fusheng sword were very annoyed. They actually watched the holy relic slip away in front of them. Later, the news that the Fuxing sword fell into the hands of a female cultivator from the outer endless sea, Qin Wei, spread throughout Yunzhong. This unknown cultivator from the outer endless sea who came from afar suddenly became the most popular figure in Yunzhong. Many sects began to track down Qin Wei's whereabouts. Among them, Juyan sect, Huayan Temple, and Guifang City were the most eager. These three sects watched Qin Wei slip away right under their noses. Unfortunately, this Qin Wei seemed to have disappeared in Yunzhong. No matter how they searched, they couldn't find any trace of her. Even nascent soul experts couldn't find her. Therefore, some people said that this Qin Wei wasn't from Yunzhong. Perhaps she had already returned to the outer endless sea? Many people believed this news, but only the people of Juyan's sect were suspicious. Because their sect master, Ling Yunhe, knew that the matter she entrusted to him was no small matter. Before she left, she should have come to ask for the reward. However, they couldn't find her anywhere, so in the end, they could only believe her. The high-level cultivators of Juyan's sect couldn't help but sigh. Although this Qin Wei was only a core formation female cultivator, her willpower and decisiveness were extraordinary. They were afraid that after she found out she had the Fuxing sword, she immediately gave up the benefits she was about to obtain and ran far away. Some of these things were known to Mo Tiange, but some were unknown to her. What she knew was that she had already become a key figure that cultivators in Yunzhong couldn't find. However, after changing her appearance, she didn't plan to get involved. Her illusory technique was very successful. Many core formation cultivators in Yunzhong recognized a late-stage core formation cultivator called Yi Xiaotian, but they didn't know that this young scholar was Qin Wei, who stirred up a huge storm in Yunzhong. What she didn't know was that her disappearance made the nascent soul big shots in Yunzhong so angry that they secretly gritted their teeth. 4 out of the 5 legendary holy relic had appeared in the past few decades. If they could gather all 5, they could go to returning ruined sea to explore it, and maybe they could find the path to the deification realm. Unfortunately, this Qin Wei disappeared with the Fuxing sword, causing their plan to completely fall through. After all, the 5 holy relic had disappeared for almost 100,000 years before they reappeared in the world. If they missed this chance, they didn't know when they would get another one. At that time, no matter how high their cultivation levels were, they would become a pile of bones. Just like that, Mo Tiange became a thorn in the eyes of the nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong. Master Immortal. A clear and melodious voice came from behind her. Mo Tiange stopped and turned around. She saw a young girl wearing Western clothes running towards her. The silver bracelets on her wrist jingled, and every step she took was a musical note. Master Immortal. The young girl stopped in front of her, raised her rosy cheeks, and looked at her. Are you leaving already? Mo Tiange smiled and looked at the young girl in front of her. Ai, why did you come? The young girl lowered her head and grabbed her braid. After a while, she raised her head again and looked at Mo Tiange with her bright eyes. Master Immortal, I'll go with you, okay? Mo Tiange was stunned. You, Master Immortal. The young girl's face was shy, but also determined. I like you, so I want to go with you. Mo Tiange smiled bitterly and couldn't help but touch her face. This wasn't the first time she encountered this kind of situation. In the past 10 years, she traveled to many places, and there were often women who confessed their feelings to her, which really made her not know whether to laugh or cry. When she dressed up as a woman, although there were also men who had feelings for her, they never expressed their love to her. However, she used the appearance-changing technique to disguise herself as a man, and from time to time, she would attract some peach blossoms. This puzzled her no matter how she thought about it. Could it be that she was more suitable to be a man? Or that she was too successful in disguising herself as a man, and her appearance was too handsome? But she definitely wouldn't transform into an old man. I can't take you with me, she said. You should go back. This is your home. Why? The Western Continent girl, widened her eyes. We Western Continent women will leave home when we have someone we like. But She paused and said gently and indifferently, but I don't have any feelings for you, so I can't take you with me. Huh? Such a straightforward refusal stunned Ai. After a while, she finally found her voice. Master Immortal. You don't like me at all? Didn't you say I was very cute? You also said you were happy with me. Mo Tienga was stunned. Did this make her misunderstand? In other words, she lost her sense of propriety. In her heart, she still thought of herself as a woman, so when she said these words, she didn't think it would cause other people to misunderstand. She sighed. Cute and love are not the same. Ai, go back. We won't see each other again. After she finished speaking, she turned around, waved her sleeves, turned into a flight light and rushed away. Master Immortal. The young girl was very anxious. Her silver bracelets jingled as she hurriedly chased after her. But how could a mortal's power resist an immortal's technique? Soon, she could no longer find that flight light. She couldn't help but squat on the ground and cry. Mo Tienga's sleeves fluttered as she landed on a mountain. Listening to the young girl's crying, she couldn't help but sigh. She flicked her sleeves and sat down cross-legged. This was the Western continent, the most dangerous place in Yunzhong. It was barren and unruly, and resources were scarce. Sitting on this mountain and looking around, all she could see were bare yellow stones. It was difficult to find any trace of green. The people living here struggled against the heavens, the earth, and the beasts, surviving with difficulty. Perhaps it was such a harsh environment that gave them tenacious faith. The people here were all brave and simple. After a long time, the young girl's crying gradually stopped. She finally stood up and walked back silently. Mo Tienga stared at her until her silhouette disappeared. Although she couldn't accept it, such a persistent and passionate feeling made her burn. Spring flowers fell, autumn wind blew, summer lotus bloomed, and winter sleeps. Time didn't stop. Year after year, in the blink of an eye, 50 years had passed. When she came to Yunzhong, she never thought she would not return for 50 years, nor did she think it would be difficult to find the way back. When they were together, she always felt that between them, there was only this kind of ordinary but long-lasting feeling. But at this time, because of this Western continent girl, she suddenly realized that deep in her heart, there was also this kind of love. This love wasn't strong, but it was mellow like wine. The longer it was stored in her heart, the deeper it became. It's time to go back, she whispered. Her harvest in the past 10 years had exceeded her expectations. Maybe she should find a place to enter closed-door meditation, advance to the peak stage, and enter the nascent soul realm in one fell swoop. In this way, she could rely on her profound cultivation level to cross the South Sea. She clenched her hands and made a decision. Chapter 437. For mortals, the Western continent was a barren land, full of ferocious beasts, not a suitable place to live. Naturally, it was also not a good place to play. Moreover, it was barren, so even merchants would not come here. For cultivators, there were no excellent spiritual veins in the Western continent, let alone heavenly treasures, spirit beasts, and spirit grasses. Therefore, unless they were looking for some strange things, they would not set foot in the Western continent. But these things weren't important to Mo Tienga. Sitting on the top of this desolate mountain in the Western continent, feeling the biting cold wind blowing, the vast and distant aura blowing on his face. For hundreds of thousands of years, other than a small number of barbarians, there were no traces of other people here. It still maintained the ancient style, and her thoughts easily entered it. She sat cross-legged and closed her eyes, feeling the howling wind blowing past her ears, as well as the distant cave dwellings and the melodious chants of the barbarians. I might as well go into seclusion here. A thought popped up in her mind. Although there were no spirit veins here, she had the virtual sky world, so it wouldn't be a problem. With this thought in mind, he decided to meditate on the spot. Doing this couldn't increase her spiritual aura, but the gains in her mental state were far from what she gained in the virtual sky world. The wind of the western continent was rough, just like the imperial sky and the queen of earth here, vast and distant, as if it came from the ancient times, without the noise of the mortal world, and without the competition of interests. Gradually, his heart melted with the wind, drifting with the wind towards the ancient world. The golden crow descended, the jade rabbit rose from the east, day and night alternated. Time passed day by day. The wind swept up the yellow soil and gradually buried the person sitting cross-legged on the mountaintop. This meditation lasted for half a month. Mo Tiange woke up from her meditative state and stared at the yellow soil piled on her body. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If she continued to meditate for a few more months, when she woke up, she was afraid that others would think of her as a desolate grave. Fortunately, this was not a problem for cultivators. She gently shook her sleeves, and the yellow soil was blown away by the wind. Her clothes were as good as new, and there was not a speck of dust on her face. She sat down cross-legged at the top of the mountain with a smile on her face. She felt extremely relaxed. In this half a month, her mental state once again had some insights. These insights allowed her to have a deeper understanding of Mo Yaoqing's cultivation experience. If that's the case, it wouldn't be a problem for him to reach the peak of the nascent soul realm. Of course, if he wanted to go into seclusion, there were still many things that he had to resolve. For example, stabilizing one's realm, guarding one's state of mind, as well as various medicinal pills that could stimulate one's advancement, as well as some protective measures. Forming one's nascent soul was different from forming one's core. If one's core shattered and failed to form one's nascent soul, one's cultivation would be crippled. Therefore, if something went wrong, she had to end her nascent soul formation before her golden core broke. Once her golden core broke, she had to succeed in her nascent soul formation. She didn't want to cultivate from the beginning. That would be much more difficult than what she was doing now. After sitting for a while, she took out a sword from her chinkuan bag. This sword was simple, heavy, and had a restrained brilliance. The sound of wind and thunder could be faintly heard, but there was a strand of devilish qi that couldn't be dispersed coiled around it. Mo Tiange sighed as she stared at the sword. This was the Fuxing sword that made Qin Wei the target that every cultivator in Yunzhong wanted to kill in recent years. All these years, it wasn't that she didn't want to uncover the secret of the Fuxing sword, but no matter how much she pondered, the Fuxing sword remained the same. She didn't know what material this sword was made of. Not only was it incomparably tough, but even divine sense couldn't penetrate its interior. Therefore, she couldn't figure out to what extent this sword had been corroded by the devilish qi. Although the ancient records of the virtual sky world said that the spirit-quenching water could wash away all devilish qi and impurities, this thing was hard to find in the world, and there were no clues about it. However, in the past few years, she heard a lot of rumors. Among them, there was one that most core formation cultivators agreed on. The so-called 5 holy objects, their power as magic weapons wasn't important. What was important was that they were the keys to the secret hidden in the Sea of Returning Ruins. Among these core formation cultivators, there were many disciples from big cultivation groups. Mo Tiange pondered. Now that the 5 holy objects were widely known in Yunzhong, this rumor was very likely to be true. But the problem was, even if it was true, how could she use this Fuxing sword? These 5 holy objects were the keys to a certain secret place in the Sea of Returning Ruins. Did this mean that the 5 holy objects had to be combined into one to become the real key? If that was the case, in order to solve this secret, either the 5 holy objects belonged to one force, or the 5 people with the holy objects were like the 5 saints in the past, they had equal strength and chose to cooperate. So troublesome. She looked at the Fuxing sword and sighed. The first one was needless to say. She was just a small core formation cultivator. How could she get all 5 holy objects? She'd probably be killed by a nascent soul cultivator as soon as she showed up. As for the second option, if they were in the celestial pole, it would be completely feasible. She had Xianqing school backing her up, so no one could underestimate her. However, this was Yunzhong. She had no roots or foundation here, so what right did she have to occupy a position of cooperation? Unless Master and Senior Marshal Brother were here. Once this thought emerged, she couldn't help but smile bitterly. In this current situation, she couldn't even go back, so how could they appear? What a pity. If she had two nascent soul cultivators as her backing, she could definitely stand out and ask for a share of the loot. Now, however, she could only hide to avoid being killed and robbed. But she was absolutely unwilling to hand over the Fusheng sword. She obtained the Fusheng sword from someone else in a dignified manner, so why should she hand it over? These people couldn't solve the secret of the Sea of Returning Ruins, and she wouldn't lose anything. In that case, she'd take the Fusheng sword back to the Celestial Pole and concentrate on cultivating. When she was strong enough, she'd come to Yunzhong again. At that time, she'd have the power to fight. Just like that, she calmly made a decision. She'd take the Fusheng sword back to the Celestial Pole and let these cultivators fight to the death in Yunzhong. It wouldn't matter to her even if they died. Perhaps, when her cultivation base improved greatly, when she came to Yunzhong again, the strength of the high-level cultivators in Yunzhong would be greatly reduced due to the internal strife. At that time, she could openly share a piece of the pie with them and even occupy more benefits. With that thought in mind, she reached out and touched the sharp blade of the Fusheng sword. A magic weapon from nearly 100,000 years ago, which had been corroded in the devil domain for so many years, still had this kind of momentum. Fu Yaozi's tool refining technique was really amazing. Not to mention restoring the Fusheng sword's former glory. If she could learn a little bit of Fu Yaozi's tool refining technique and refine her magic weapon, the power of her magic weapon would definitely be greatly improved. Unfortunately, her current cultivation level wasn't enough to find the secret of the Fusheng sword. After thinking about these things, she was about to put the Fusheng sword away when she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest as if a needle had been ruthlessly stabbed into her heart, almost making her lose consciousness in a split second. Ugh! She covered her chest and explored her heart meridian with her spiritual aura, only to find that her heart meridian was completely normal. There was no problem at all. Then, she felt another sharp pain. This time, she even fainted for several breaths before she recovered. What's going on? In a trance, she suddenly realized what had happened. The one who was injured wasn't her but Qin Shi. There was a blood oath between them, so they could sense each other's condition. When they were fine, this kind of feeling was very weak, but if there was a strong feeling, it meant one of them was seriously injured. She panicked as she realized this. Such a strong feeling actually made her faint for a moment even though she was thousands of miles away. What kind of injury did Qin Shi suffer? Would his life be in danger? Strange. He'd already advanced into the nascent soul realm and his divine power was powerful. What kind of danger did he encounter that made him seriously injured? She tried hard to breathe and calm herself down. Mo Tiange closed her eyes and continued to sense Qin Shi's condition. Although it wasn't as painful as before, the feeling of pain came in waves and didn't stop. What was he doing? Was he fighting with someone or a demonic beast? Where's Master? Did he go to some dangerous place again? Her mind was in a mess, and she almost couldn't suppress her fear. After being separated for 50 years, she was looking forward to reuniting with him, but now, another burst of pain came. Mo Tiange covered her chest, feeling that her blood and qi were surging. She couldn't suppress it. Originally, the feeling of the blood oath wasn't this strong, but she was panicking now, which caused her blood and qi to become unstable. After enduring for a while, she finally felt a sweetness in her throat, and a mouthful of blood came up. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth and dripped on the Fusheng sword in her hand. The shiny sword suddenly shone with a dazzling light. Mo Tiange was stunned. Before she could react, the Fusheng sword shone brightly and swallowed her whole body. This is... She seemed to be hit hard in the head, and she fainted. Her surroundings were gray, and her divine sense was lost. She felt like she was dead, but she also felt like she was alive. Senior martial brother. She recalled the strange scene before she fainted and the reason she vomited blood. She couldn't help but feel anxious. Was he still alive? She sensed that the blood oath didn't seem to be broken. In other words, he should still be alive. Thinking of this, she calmed down. As long as he was alive, it was fine. He would definitely find a way to escape. The problem now was that she seemed to be in trouble herself. She wasn't unfamiliar with this feeling. In fact, this kind of coma was caused by her divine sense being sucked into her sea of consciousness. But the problem was why? Her blood was absorbed by the Fusheng sword, and then her divine sense was sucked in. Could it be that the Fusheng sword was hiding some secret? Just as she thought about this, she suddenly heard a soft sigh coming from the gray space. Immediately, her hair stood on end. This was her sea of consciousness, and every corner of it was under her control. How could there be someone else's sigh? Who? She was on guard. Although she was in the weakest sea of consciousness, she had cultivated the soul-refining art to a certain level, so she had the power to fight back. However, the sea of consciousness was fragile. This person could sneak into her sea of consciousness without a sound, so his strength must be extraordinary. She calmed down and said, "Who are you? Why are you in my sea of consciousness?" Alas! Another soft sigh sounded, but it was clearer than the last time. As if sensing her hostility, this person finally spoke. "You actually have the spiritual roots of the origin, and you even cultivated the body of the origin. It seems you're indeed my fated person." Mo Tiange was stunned. There was no hostility in this person's words, there was even a sense of affection. The Fusheng sword, the fated person. She was shocked. "You're Fu Yaozi." In the gray space, the person chuckled softly. "You're really smart, baby." "Yes, I'm Fu Yaozi." Chapter 438. Mo Tiange was stunned for a long time. Wasn't this similar to when she met Mo Yaoqing when she was a child? However, she was no longer an ordinary village girl now, so she quickly made her own judgment. Fu Yaozi must have left some kind of restriction on the Fusheng sword, and her blood just happened to trigger the restriction, which led to such a thing happening. However, Fu Yaozi's divine sense was able to enter her sea of knowledge with the help of a foreign object. His method was really amazing. She was already a core formation cultivator now, so the sea of knowledge was the most secretive thing. Even nascent soul cultivators couldn't enter it easily. So it's Senior Fu Yaozi. The cultivators in Yunzhong all said that Fu Yaozi not only had a profound cultivation level, but he was also an admirable person. If it was someone else, Mo Tiange would have to be cautious to prevent others from attacking her sea of knowledge. But since it was Fu Yaozi, she felt a little relieved. Why did Senior enter my sea of knowledge? Even so, she still raised her guard. Did Senior attach his divine sense to the Fusheng sword? Yes. Fu Yaozi's voice was gentle and amiable. The Fusheng sword has the divine sense I sealed to wait for the fated person. You have the body of the origin, so you triggered the restriction. Body of the origin? Mo Tiange was secretly astonished. Could it be that this Senior Fu Yao also has spiritual roots of the origin? Otherwise, why would he need the body of the origin to be his fated person? Let's talk about this later, Fu Yaozi said gently. Junior, this divine sense was sealed before I left the Sea of Returning Ruins. I wonder how long has it been since my era, and has my original body passed away? The Sea of Returning Ruins? Does that mean Fu Yaozi was still in the nascent soul realm at that time? Mo Tiange thought to herself. She calmed down and answered, Senior, according to the rumors in Yunzhong, you didn't pass away. Instead, you advanced to the soul formation realm and left this world. Oh. Fu Yaozi was a little surprised, then he said, in that case, the rumors are true. Rumors? Mo Tiange was confused. Although Fu Yaozi sounded a little surprised, he didn't sound very surprised. In other words, when he sealed this divine sense, he already had the hope of advancing to the soul formation realm? Fu Yaozi didn't answer and continued to ask, then what era is it now? Mo Tiange answered, according to legend, you've been in the deification realm for almost 100,000 years. 100,000 years. Fu Yaozi paused for a moment, then sighed. It's actually been so long. If that's the case, everything has already become a legend. You're right, Mo Tiange said. Although everyone in Yunzhong knows about Fu Yaozi now, very few people know about his deeds. Fu Yaozi sighed and asked, what about you? Junior, who are you, and how did you obtain this Fusheng sword? This question made Mo Tiange hesitate for a moment. After thinking about it, she felt that Fu Yaozi was only a wisp of his divine comprehension, so there wasn't anything he couldn't say. Besides, he was in her sea of knowledge, so it would be very easy for him to know whether she was telling the truth or not. He said, Junior is from the north of Yunzhong, a person of the celestial pole. Several decades ago, I crossed the sea and came to Yunzhong. Senior's Fusheng sword was said to have been lost in the infernal domain when you were fighting the 10 infernal monarchs. It had been corroded for tens of thousands of years and was later brought out of the infernal domain by an infernal cultivator. Junior had obtained the Fusheng sword from him. The infernal domain? Fu Yaozi muttered, no wonder there's a lingering devil aura in the Fusheng sword. So that's why. His words attracted Mo Tiange's attention. Senior, the Fusheng sword has been corroded in the infernal domain for tens of thousands of years, but why isn't Senior affected at all? As far as she knew, Dao and devils were innately in conflict. Fu Yaozi was a Dao cultivator, so his restrictions in the infernal domain would definitely be corroded like the Fusheng sword. But now, it seemed like Fu Yaozi's divine sense wasn't affected at all. Fu Yaozi smiled and said gently, if it was so easily corroded by devil aura, my restrictions would be too useless. Mo Tiange thought to herself. In that case, Fu Yaozi's secret technique actually wasn't afraid of devil aura? This was really tempting, Junior, Fu Yaozi said, you said you're from the celestial pole? Yes, Mo Tiange answered. The celestial pole is located in the north of Yunzhong, separated by a sea. However, that sea is really too dangerous. For more than 100,000 years, there's almost no one coming or going from there. Senior, with Senior's divine power, you should know about the celestial pole, right? His words sounded like a compliment, but for a legendary figure like Fu Yaozi, this little compliment wasn't excessive. Others might not be able to do it, but he was known as the #1 cultivator in Yunzhong, so it wasn't strange for him to have this little bit of divine power. Sure enough, Fu Yaozi said, I do know about the celestial pole. Years ago, I also crossed the sea. The North Sea is unpredictable, but a junior like you actually came to Yunzhong. It's really inconceivable. Presumably, you have some divine power and extremely good luck. Being praised by such a legendary figure, Mo Tiange was a bit embarrassed. She said, to be honest, Junior didn't come to Yunzhong directly by crossing the sea. Junior found an undersea passage, oh? After Fu Yaozi recovered from his surprise, he smiled and said, no wonder. It's really too dangerous for a core formation cultivator to cross the North Sea. Mo Tiange thought to herself, Nia Wushang actually crossed the South Sea by relying on her core formation cultivation level. But this matter wasn't important, so there was no need to mention it in front of Fu Yaozi. Fu Yaozi paused for a moment then continued to say, whether you're a cultivator in Yunzhong or a cultivator in the celestial pole isn't important. Since you've awakened the restriction on the Fusheng sword, you're my fated person. Mo Tiange's curiosity was piqued when she heard Fu Yaozi mention the term, fated person, once again. She asked, may I ask why Senior sealed his divine sense on the Fusheng sword? What does fated person mean? Also, Senior just said that Junior was able to awaken the restriction because I have the body of the origin. Senior, you. There were countless questions in her mind. If the restriction on the Fusheng sword was triggered by blood, how could it last until today? Just like in the virtual sky world, her spiritual roots of the origin were the key. If the Fusheng sword was also like that, what about Fu Yaozi? Fu Yaozi chuckled and said slowly, Junior, your guess is correct. I'm the same as you. I have the spiritual roots of the origin and I've also cultivated the body of the origin. Therefore, the restriction on the Fusheng sword can only be triggered by cultivators with the body of the origin. As if sensing Imotinga's surprise, he said, Don't worry, I'll tell you about it slowly. Fu Yaozi began to slowly tell her about his life. When he was a child, he was taken on the path of cultivation by an individual cultivator and set foot on the path to immortality. Just like her, no one knew he was a heaven-gifted genius. They only knew he had wasted spiritual roots with all 5 elements, so no cultivation group was willing to accept him as a disciple. In such an environment, Fu Yaozi cultivated with difficulty. He had a tenacious character, a firm will, and he was extremely intelligent. He often understood cultivation techniques at a glance. Although he lacked medicinal pills and medicine, and he didn't have a good cultivation environment, he still reached the foundation building realm by relying on luck and temperament. When he reached the foundation building realm, his cultivation level stagnated. For cultivators with 5 spiritual roots like him, even if they were extremely lucky and succeeded in building their foundation, they would generally stay in the foundation building realm and would find it difficult to advance. However, at this time, his chance to become an immortal finally came. In the hands of a destitute cultivator, he obtained an incomplete cultivation technique left behind from the distant past era. This cultivation technique was the art of the origin based on the theory of the origin. This art of the origin wasn't outstanding, and it was incomplete. The most terrible thing was that it wasn't suitable for the current cultivation environment. Therefore, although many cultivators with inferior spiritual roots had high hopes for it, in the end, they couldn't practice it, so this cultivation technique became a useless one. Fu Yaozi obtained this cultivation technique at a very low price. Only then did he understand that his spiritual roots were called the spiritual roots of the origin and that it was a heaven-gifted genius from the distant past era. After that, he began to carefully study this cultivation technique. It was also because of his amazing perception that, by relying on this incomplete art of the origin, he was actually able to comprehend the true cultivation path of the spiritual roots of the origin. From there, step by step, he slowly completed the cultivation technique. Because of this cultivation technique, he understood the cultivation environment of the distant past era. As it turned out, it was completely different from the current era. Naturally, he developed a strong interest in the distant past era and began to tirelessly explore the history of the distant past era and the distant past era. In order to explore these ancient legends, he went in and out of all kinds of secret places and obtained many natural treasures, allowing his cultivation level to advance rapidly. Moreover, because the Tao he embraced was completely different from others, he gradually made a big name for himself. Through Fu Yaozi's simple narration, Mo Tiange grasped a key point and asked, Senior, the cultivators in Yunzhong all said the Tao you embraced was greatly different from others. Junior also heard about it, but I'm very puzzled. Why do you think cultivators should shoulder more responsibilities when they have power? This is completely inconsistent with the current cultivation world. Fu Yaozi chuckled and said, I just said I explored the cultivation path of the distant past era and the distant past era, so it's naturally different from the current one. Mo Tiange was stunned. So, the Tao of cultivators in the distant past era and the distant past era wasn't like this? Correct. Fu Yaozi said, to be exact, it's the Tao of the distant past era. In the distant past era, this kind of Tao has already declined, and in our era, no one knows about it. At this point, Fu Yaozi sighed. Back then, I didn't understand why there were no more cultivators who ascended to immortality in our current world. Was it simply because the spiritual aura wasn't strong enough? I don't think so. Later, as my cultivation level gradually increased, I came into contact with more and more secret places from the distant past era. Finally, I was sure it was related to Tao. Tao. Mo Tiange was shocked. Feifei once said the rules of the human world were different. Could it be the same as what Fu Yaozi said? If that was the case, wasn't the current cultivation world a deformed existence? Junior, you haven't reached the nascent soul realm yet, so you don't need to worry about this matter too much. After so many years, you're the only one who successfully triggered the restriction on the Fuxing sword, so you're my fated person. Let me ask you, are you willing to inherit my unfulfilled wish and continue the path I might not have finished? Mo Tiange took a deep breath. From what he said, Fu Yaozi seemed to be looking for a successor. If she agreed, would she be able to obtain this amazingly talented cultivator's inheritance? However, what did he mean by a path he might not have finished? As if sensing her confusion, Fu Yaozi said, if you agree, you'll be my successor, and I'll teach you everything I've learned in my life. However, you have to promise me that you'll continue to explore the Tao of the distant past era and look for the truth of this cultivation world. Chapter 439. Fu Yaozi was said to be the #1 celestial cultivator in the clouds. He didn't belong to any sect, but he had a body full of amazing supernatural powers. He traveled through the clouds and fought against the 10 great demon monarchs alone without being at a disadvantage. In the end, he turned into a deity and left, becoming an eternal legend in the clouds. How many people would be able to resist such a temptation when such a person said, "Become my successor"? Even a demonic cultivator would be willing to cripple his cultivation and start from scratch, right? Mo Tiange had to admit that she couldn't withstand this kind of temptation, especially since Fu Yaozi also had spiritual roots of the origin like her. Although she already had a master, this was not a problem. Even though she inherited Fu Yaozi's legacy, Xianqing School was still her school, and Lord Daoist Jinghe was still her master. Senior, this junior is very willing to be your successor. Mo Tiange said cautiously, but what do you mean by finding the truth about the cultivation world? Heh. Fu Yaozi chuckled. What does the primordial era look like? Why did God leave the world? Why did demons, immortals, and demons have to be separated? Why were the primordial era and the ancient era destroyed? What was the difference between the righteousness of ancient times and the righteousness of today? Why had no one ascended after so many years? Is our method of cultivation really correct? He paused and asked, don't you want to know these questions? Mo Tiange was silent. Fu Yaozi's questions were all questions that she couldn't answer right now, and they weren't things that she could find the answers to in her current state. However, if one day, she could form her nascent soul and reach the deification stage, then these would be the questions she would seek the answers to. Because at that time, she would have to pursue the true meaning of the world and find a way to ascend. Junior will explore these things sooner or later, but not now, Mo Tiange said. Fu Yaozi chuckled, it looks like this old man did not misjudge you. After a pause, he said, since you have this ambition, then are you willing to be my successor? Since the question was already asked, how could Mo Tiange still refuse? She said, Junior is willing. Hearing her promise, Fu Yaozi smiled warmly and said, since that's the case, from now on, you're my, Fu Yaozi's, successor. Mo Tiange cleverly changed the way she addressed him. Disciple greets master. Right now, the two of them were in the sea of consciousness, just a wisp of divine sense. The so-called greeting was just a way of expressing their stance. Fu Yaozi naturally understood and said, no need to be so polite. He paused for a moment and said, since you and I are master and disciple, then shouldn't you tell me about your matters? Mo Tiange was stunned. She suddenly realized she hadn't even told Fu Yaozi her name, so she immediately said with shame, disciple has been rude. Master, please don't blame me. Fu Yaozi still chuckled and did not find it strange. Mo Tiange couldn't help but have a strange feeling that this master of hers was a gentle person. Her two masters really had very different personalities. One was so arrogant that his tail was up to the sky, while the other was calm and indifferent. Master, I will naturally report everything to you in full detail. However, can we change to another place? Fu Yaozi expressed his doubts. Mo Tiange hesitated. This is disciple's sea of knowledge. Fu Yaozi paused for a moment and said, "Oh." The sea of knowledge was hidden behind the dantian. It could be said to be a cultivator's most secretive and most vulnerable place. Even the closest master and disciple couple wouldn't let each other enter. Entering another person's sea of knowledge was indeed a cultivator's biggest taboo. Seeing that Fu Yaozi didn't answer immediately, Mo Tiange asked, "Could it be that master can only exist in disciple's sea of knowledge?" This wasn't impossible. After all, this wasn't Fu Yaozi's real body, it was only a wisp of his divine sense. "That's not it." Fu Yaozi smiled and said, "Master entered your sea of knowledge just to test you. Since you've already obtained my approval, of course you can leave." Mo Tiange breathed a sigh of relief. Although she had agreed to become Fu Yaozi's successor, there wasn't much master-disciple relationship between them. She instinctively felt uneasy letting him stay in her sea of knowledge like this. "Master, then next, you don't need to say anything," Fu Yaozi said. "I'll leave your sea of knowledge first. When the time comes, you'll naturally wake up when you're alone." "Yes." After a while, Fu Yaozi's divine sense really slowly disappeared from her sea of knowledge. Mo Tiange immediately concealed her spirit and qi and entered a tranquil state. Whoosh! Suddenly, she heard the sound of a sharp weapon. Mo Tiange opened her eyes, saw the earth in front of her, and heard the whistling wind in her ears. She heaved a sigh of relief. She didn't enter her sea of knowledge on her own but was brought in by Fu Yaozi. This kind of feeling wasn't good. If she was trapped in her own sea of knowledge and couldn't come out, she would become a living dead person. "How is it? Is there any problem?" Fu Yaozi's voice came, but it was a bit more vague than in her sea of knowledge. Mo Tiange looked down and saw that the voice came from the Fusheng sword. She asked, "Master, can you attach yourself to the sword?" "Of course. This sword was specially refined by me in order to store my divine sense." Fu Yaozi paused for a moment then said, "Disciple, Master's divine sense has been triggered by you, but I'm not sure how long it can last. You'd better hurry up." Upon hearing this, Mo Tiange suddenly remembered that something like divine sense would dissipate one day after it left the body. Although some divine senses could be stored for a long time, they couldn't exist forever. She didn't dare to waste any more time and began to tell Fu Yaozi everything about her. Fu Yaozi asked very carefully. From the moment she stepped on the path of cultivation to when she traveled to Yunzhong, he asked about everything in detail, especially about the art of the origin. When he heard that Mo Tiange met 2 deification cultivators and obtained the art of the origin from there, he couldn't help but sigh at her good luck. Although many nascent soul cultivators knew about the existence of deification cultivators in this world, only a few of them had actually met one. For some reason, after cultivators reached the deification realm, they would choose to leave the world and no longer interact with the world. Perhaps their cultivation levels had reached the peak, so the things in this world could no longer attract them. Mo Tiange was indeed very lucky to be able to obtain the art of the origin bestowed by a deification cultivator. She wasn't like him, who only had an incomplete cultivation technique and had to go through untold hardships to explore secret places left behind from the distant past era before his cultivation level could advance step by step. He talked about it for a whole day. This was the first time Mo Tiange recalled her life so carefully. Now that she thought about it again, she had a different experience. It was as if she was watching other people's lives as an outsider. After he finished talking, the Fusheng sword fell silent. Mo Tiange waited for a long time, but Fu Yaozi didn't say anything. She couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy and called out, "Master." "En?" A faint voice came from the Fusheng sword. "Is there something wrong with what disciple experienced?" Fu Yaozi was silent for a while then said, "That's not it. It's just that the art of the origin you practiced was taught by a deification cultivator, so I don't know what else I can teach you." The art of the origin Zhong Muling taught her was a complete set. Coupled with Zhong Muling's own modifications, it was naturally extraordinary. As for Fu Yaozi, although there were rumors in Yunzhong that he had also reached the deification realm, this divine sense was left behind when he was in the nascent soul realm. His cultivation technique naturally couldn't compare to the one Zhong Muling taught her. After a while, Fu Yaozi said, "That being the case, I won't teach you the art of the origin. However, I can teach you some cultivation experiences and divine abilities in fights of magical powers." Mo Tiange was overjoyed. She had Zhong Muling's Taiyuan record and Mo Yaoqing's art of Sunu, so she didn't have any desire for cultivation techniques. As for Fu Yaozi, rumor had it that his divine abilities ran amok in Yunzhong and he could fight 10 devil monarchs alone when he was in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. If she could get his experience in fights of magical powers, her strength would definitely increase greatly. "Thank you, Master." "You don't have to thank me too early," Fu Yaozi said. Fu Yaozi said, "What I left behind is only a divine sense. My abilities aren't even half of my original bodies, so the things I can teach you are limited." Despite that, Mo Tiange wasn't disappointed. "Even if I can learn half of Master's divine abilities, I'll still benefit a lot. Besides, Disciple doesn't think I'm a stupid person. I also have my own divine abilities. As long as I can master Master's divine abilities, my strength will naturally increase. If I only learn Master's divine abilities, I'll be at a disadvantage." "Oh." Her words surprised Fu Yaozi, but he soon smiled and said, "You're really smart. Master is very pleased." After pondering for a while, Fu Yaozi said, "Your current cultivation level is only a step away from the peak stage of the core formation realm, but it's still not enough to advance to the nascent soul realm. During this period of time, Master will first help you reach the peak stage and stabilize your realm. After that, you can go to the Sea of Returning Ruins to find fated chances and enter the nascent soul realm in one go." The Sea of Returning Ruins? Upon hearing this, Mo Tiange couldn't help but recall the legend of the 5 saints. She couldn't help but ask, "Master, according to the rumor in Yunzhong, you and the other 4 seniors are collectively known as the 5 saints. Each of you passed down a treasure, which is the key to opening the secret place in the Sea of Returning Ruins, right?" "Oh. There are still people who know about this?" Fu Yaozi was a little surprised, but he soon said, "Yes, it's true. However, it's not as simple as the rumors say." Then, just as she was about to continue asking, Fu Yaozi interrupted her. "Let's talk about this later. When the time comes, Master will tell you. For now, you should improve your cultivation level. If you reach the peak stage of the core formation realm, with my help, you can go to the Sea of Returning Ruins." Mo Tiange swallowed the word she wanted to say and answered, "Yes." With the help of Fu Yaozi's divine sense, she would definitely be able to get a share of the secret place in the Sea of Returning Ruins, so there was no need to worry. Right now, it was better to be obedient and improve her strength first. In the following days, Fu Yaozi taught Mo Tiange his fighting divine abilities one by one. Mo Tiange returned to the virtual sky world and practiced according to his instructions. After learning about the existence of the virtual sky world, Fu Yaozi was very surprised. He repeatedly sighed at her heaven-defying fated chances. It was no wonder she had such a high cultivation level at such a young age. If he had such a fated chance back then, how could he have wasted so many years? In an environment full of spiritual aura like the virtual sky world, many of Fu Yaozi's experiences became a bit easier to cultivate. Time flowed like water. Under Fu Yaozi's guidance, Mo Tiange cultivated and learned divine abilities at the same time. Several years passed. During this period of time, Mo Tiange had never been so focused. In her cultivation career, she had never had someone to guide her. Even her master, Lord Daoist Jinghe, could only guide her slowly due to the limitations of his cultivation technique and couldn't personally teach her. Occasionally, when she was free, she would think about the reaction of the blood oath and would feel anxious. Fortunately, the connection between them hadn't been broken, and she no longer had such a strong reaction. Presumably, Qin Shi's injuries had gradually healed, right? But she didn't know where he was now or when she could go look for him. Chapter 440. She waved the heaven and earth fan, and countless immortal flowers and spiritual plants appeared out of thin air and circled in the air. Mo Tiange shouted softly, "Go!" The fragrant flowers and plants instantly emitted a fierce momentum, and the spiritual aura exploded, raising a lush slope to the ground. Not bad. Its power isn't great, but its control of spiritual aura is very exquisite. The voice in the Fusheng sword praised, "Your natal magic weapon is really marvelous. Your ancestor must have been a brilliant person to be able to think of such a magic weapon." Unfortunately, Mo Tiange had told Fu Yaozi about Mo Yaoqing, and he sighed with emotion after hearing her experience. Fu Yaozi was a strong-willed person, so he admired cultivators like Mo Yaoqing who never gave up despite experiencing difficulties. He also heard that she, as a female cultivator, didn't want to be burdened by her appearance and was very intelligent, so he admired her even more. Mo Tiange also sighed when she thought of Mo Yaoqing. Without her beauty, Mo Yaoqing would have become one of the famous great cultivators in Yunzhong. Unfortunately, her beauty not only didn't bring her any benefits, but it also harmed her life. Okay, you've grasped 50 to 60% of the wonders of this heaven and earth fan, so you've passed for the time being. 50 to 60%? Mo Tiange was surprised. Only 50 to 60%? Of course. Fu Yaozi's voice was still calm. This fan is your natal magic weapon, but it's hard for you to understand it with your current realm. It's already not bad for you to display 50 to 60% of its power. You'll only be able to display its full power when you reach the nascent soul realm. At this point, Fu Yaozi sighed again. Otherwise, with my ability, how could I easily admire others? Mo Tiange couldn't help but mutter in her heart. If he and Mo Yaoqing were born in the same era, he would have fallen in love with her, right? Unfortunately, the two of them were tens of thousands of years apart, so they couldn't meet. Speaking of which, although she didn't have as deep feelings for this master as Lord Daoist Jinghe, she still admired him after getting along with him for several years. He was kind, upright. If Mo Yaoqing had met such a person back then, she probably wouldn't have such prejudice against men. "Master, what should I do next?" "Cultivate." Fu Yaozi said, "These past few years, Master has already taught you a lot of magical techniques. Now, even if you were to face a nascent soul cultivator, you shouldn't be completely defenseless. What you lack the most right now is cultivation. If you can improve your cultivation, your strength will naturally increase." Mo Tiange nodded. There was no need to think about advancing to the nascent soul stage in a short period of time. Advancing to the nascent soul stage was not a simple matter. Even if everything was ready, it was normal to only have results after 10 or 20 years of seclusion. As for Fu Yaozi, he was only a wisp of divine consciousness. Although he could reside on the Fusheng sword, he could not wait until that moment. Mo Tiange quickly returned to the virtual sky world to enter closed-door meditation. Under Fu Yaozi's guidance and with the help of various spiritual herbs, she was originally only a step away from completing the core formation realm. As long as there were no accidents, she would be able to advance within 2 to 3 years. While Mo Tiange was hiding in the desolate land of the western continent, preparing to advance to the peak stage of the core formation realm, the whole of Yunzhong was turned upside down because of the whereabouts of Qin Wei. In eastern Tang's Zhuoyan sect, 7 or 8 people gathered in the Immortals' Cave of the head Grand Supreme Elder, Master Daoist Yuanmu. These people were either sitting or standing. Half of them were top nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong, while the other half were only in the core formation realm. The person sitting in the first position was naturally Master Daoist Yuanmu, the head Grand Supreme Elder of Zhuoyan sect. He was the cultivator with the highest cultivation level in Zhuoyan's sect and one of the strongest among the late nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong. A sect that could become a big shot among the cultivation sects in Yunzhong was bound to have many talented and powerful cultivators. The reason why Zhuoyan's sect had occupied the title of the number 1 cultivation group for so many years and never declined was because it never lacked late nascent soul cultivators, and its strength had always been at the top of Yunzhong's cultivators. This master Daoist Yuan Mu was less than 1,000 years old, but he had long entered the late stage of the nascent soul realm. For so many years, he had always been one of the most powerful cultivators in Yunzhong. Sitting next to Master Daoist Yuan Mu was a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator who was about the same age as him. He was the ancestor of Sky Snow City's Ling clan, Ling Shiyu. Although Ling Shiyu was only in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm and his strength couldn't be considered second in Jiuyan's sect, he had a very good relationship with Master Daoist Yuan Mu and was good at making friends with people of the same generation, so his status in Jiuyan's sect was also extraordinary. As for the core formation cultivator standing behind Ling Shiyu, he was Ling clan's descendant, Ling Yunhe. In front of the head Grand Supreme Elder and the ancestor, even though Ling Yunhe was the sect head of Jiuyan's sect, he could only stand. Aside from these three Jiuyan sect hosts, the other people in the guest seats were monks and scholars, all dressed differently. Sitting on the left was an old monk with a white beard, white eyebrows, and a kind face. If Mo Tiange was here, she would definitely recognize this old monk whose eyes were always closed. He was revered Wu Ming. Behind him stood Wu Ming, who'd tried to rob her but lost the inescapable net. Sitting on the right was a fair-skinned, beardless young scholar in his 20s. This scholar was young, but he was already in the late stage of the nascent soul realm. His cultivation level was unfathomable. The core formation cultivator behind him looked like a middle-aged scholar. He was actually Han Shizhi, who once set up an ambush in Sky Snow City to snatch the Fusheng sword. Three great late-stage nascent soul cultivators representing the three great cultivation factions of Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism were now gathered together. If outsiders found out about this, they would definitely turn pale with fright. You too. Master Daoist Yuan Mu was the first to break the silence. He looked at the monk and the scholar and said, "What should we do about this matter? Today, we have to come up with a plan. You can't just not take a stand." Upon hearing this, the young scholar put down the teacup he'd been holding and said with a smile, "Brother Daoist Yuan Mu, our righteous path has always been the leader of your sect. Regarding this matter, Brother Daoist should naturally take the lead." Revered Wu Ming, who'd been smiling like the Maitreya Buddha, just nodded without saying anything. Seeing this situation, Master Daoist Yuan Mu secretly frowned. Logically speaking, with Jiuyan's sect status in Yunzhong, he should have taken the lead and expressed his stance first. However, the attitude of these two old fellows made him unhappy. At a time like this, they just had to make him speak first. After pondering for a while, Master Daoist Yuan Mu finally opened his mouth. "Fellow Taoists, this matter is of great importance. It can be said that it affects the fortune of Yunzhong for 1,000 years. As the leaders of the three great factions of the righteous path, it's really not a good thing if we continue to make excuses. Why don't we tell each other about our plans and come up with a workable solution? What do you think?" Fellow Daoist Yuan Mu's words make sense. Revered Wu Ming was still smiling. He put his palms together and said, "Now that things have come to this, I'm sure none of our three sects are willing to give up this opportunity. If not for this, we wouldn't be sitting here together." The old monk's words finally made Master Daoist Yuan Mu feel a little better. He immediately said, "That's right. Since both of you have chosen to come to my Jiuyan sect to discuss this matter, I believe that both of you have the intention to cooperate, right?" Hearing this, Revered Wu Ming uttered the name of Buddha and nodded slightly. Seeing this, Master Daoist Yuan Mu turned to the young scholar. "Mr. Yu, what about you?" "Naturally." The young scholar lightly waved the folding fan in his hand and said casually. On the surface, they had reached an intention to cooperate. Master Daoist Yuan Mu smiled. "Since both of you have the same idea as me, then there's an explanation for this matter." After a pause, he said, "Both of you know that if we want to open that mysterious space, just the items in the hands of our three sects aren't enough. We also need to find the Heavenly Demon Tower and the supporting life sword." Revered Wu Ming nodded. The matter of the 5 saints was originally caused by the appearance of the Heavenly Demon Tower. However, We still don't know whose hands the heavenly demon tower ended up in. What should we do? The young scholar surnamed Yu smiled faintly. The whereabouts of the heavenly demon tower is easy to deal with. Oh. Hearing this, Master Daoist Yuan Mu looked at him. What does Mr. Yu think? Scholar Yu said, no matter whose hands the heavenly demon tower ends up in, it still needs to be used together with the other 4 holy items in order to be effective. Since that's the case, we just need to gather all the other holy items together, and the owner of the heavenly demon tower will naturally appear. When he said this, everyone else couldn't help but nod. So, the most important thing for us now is to find the supporting life sword. Everyone knows about the supporting life sword. For the past 10 years, all the major forces in Yunzhong have been searching for the whereabouts of that female cultivator from the outer endless sea. It can be said that everyone has turned Yunzhong upside down, but this female cultivator seems to have disappeared without a trace. Under such circumstances, everyone thinks that it's very likely that this woman has left Yunzhong and returned to her hometown, right? That's right. Master Daoist Yuan Mu nodded. It's been more than 10 years, and many forces in Yunzhong have been searching for her, but they actually haven't found a single clue. Unless this person isn't in Yunzhong, it's really hard to explain. But if we can't find the supporting life sword, we can't cooperate even if we want to. Scholar Yu's words caused everyone present to fall silent. None of the 5 holy items could be missing. This was the crux of the problem. Although the heavenly demon tower had disappeared decades ago, everyone knew that it must still be in Yunzhong. It was just that the person who obtained it didn't want to publicize it. But this supporting life sword, it was hard to say. Since Mr. Yu said so, you should have already thought of a countermeasure, right? Ling Shiyu, who was sitting at the side, said. Scholar Yu still smiled faintly. He glanced at Ling Shiyu and nodded lightly. That's right. I have indeed thought about this for a long time. Although I haven't thought of a definite solution, I have some ideas. Master Daoist Yuan Mu was delighted. Mr. Yu, please speak frankly. Scholar Yu said, everyone, do you really think that the female cultivator from the outer endless sea has left Yunzhong? Master Daoist Yuan Mu and revered Wu Ming were stunned. What did he mean by that? Scholar Yu continued, speaking of which, it's quite a coincidence. The juniors of our 3 sects have all seen this female cultivator with the surname Qin before, but none of us know her true origins. Am I right? Ling Yunhe and the other 2 involuntarily nodded. There was no need to talk about Zhu Wu. He knew the least. Han Shizhi and Ling Yunhe had both conversed with her before, but even Ling Yunhe, who had gone through danger together with them, didn't know this female cultivator's true origins. Cultivators from the outer endless sea. The so-called outer endless sea refers to outside the inner endless sea of Yunzhong. Other than the islands far away in the depths of the sea, we, the people of Yunzhong, also call Yuan Province and Shaoyang the outer endless sea. When Scholar Yu said this, a thought flashed in Ling Yunhe's mind, and he blurted out, Senior Yu means that this Qin Wei might be from Yuan Province or Shaoyang? Scholar Yu shook his head lightly. Not necessarily, but we can't rule out this possibility. Chapter 441. Mo Tiange opened her eyes, her face full of joy. She looked down at her hands, which were sparkling like jade and surrounded by spiritual aura. They were even richer than before. Fu Yaozi's praise came from the Fusheng sword. Not bad. In just 3 years, you've reached the peak stage of the core formation realm, and your realm is stable. Sure enough, your aptitude is extraordinary. Mo Tiange withdrew her spiritual aura and said, if it weren't for Master's guidance, disciple wouldn't have reached the peak stage so smoothly. Fu Yaozi chuckled but didn't say anything. This wasn't a compliment. If it weren't for his guidance, with Mo Tiange's aptitude, it would have been almost impossible for her to advance so smoothly even though it wouldn't have been a problem. During this advancement, she didn't waste any spiritual power or medicinal pills. With Fu Yaozi's experience and vision, he did the right thing at the right time and achieved the best result. Master, since I've reached the peak stage of the core formation realm, should we go to the Sea of Returning Ruins next? There's no hurry. Fu Yaozi said, before going to the Sea of Returning Ruins, you must prepare something that can restrain devil aura. Huh? Mo Tiange was stunned and puzzled. Why? Fu Yaozi said, for some reason, there's a very powerful devil aura in that wonderful place. If you don't have something that can restrain devil aura, you'll inevitably be in a mess. I see. Mo Tiange thought for a moment, then took out the lotus scarlet umbrella from her Qinkuan bag. Master, what do you think of this? The divine sense from the Fuxing sword flew out and circled around the lotus scarlet umbrella. Fu Yaozi said, this thing has a miraculous effect in isolating devil aura. However, in my opinion, the best magic weapon you have to restrain devil aura is your natal magic weapon. Natal magic weapon, heaven and earth fan? Mo Tiange was puzzled. Master, disciple's heaven and earth fan isn't special, that's because you're not knowledgeable enough, Fu Yaozi said gently. I can see that the bones of your fan are obviously made of the bones of divine beasts. Divine beasts are born with the ability to restrain devil aura, so it's best to use it to deal with devil cultivators. Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. She suddenly recalled the encounter she had in Descending Star City several decades ago. At that time, Mei Feng, the city lord of Descending Star City, was chasing after her, but she didn't know why she was seriously injured. At that time, she was indeed using the heaven and earth fan to defend herself. In that case, it was actually the dragon bone on the heaven and earth fan that played a role? Then, she remembered where the dragon bones came from. This thing was something she obtained from the divine dragon sacrificial temple when she was still in the foundation building realm. In that sacrificial temple, there was also a strange stone tablet that allowed Ren Yufeng to cultivate his dead aura. Could it be that the dragon bone was actually used to restrain that stone tablet? Then, she associated City Lord Mei's devil aura with the so-called cultivation technique on the stone tablet. According to her conjecture, City Lord Mei should have obtained a stone tablet from the Black Tortoise sacrificial temple that also contained devil aura. She had a faint conjecture in her heart. However, she couldn't confirm this conjecture at the moment. But, she might be able to verify it if there was an opportunity in the future. I do have a few tricks up my sleeves when it comes to dealing with demonic cultivators. With these two magic treasures of yours, it should be enough. However, you still need to prepare some things. Yes, Master. Mo Tiange wasn't surprised by Fu Yaozi's words. He fought alone against 10 devil monarchs without falling into a disadvantageous position and even forced them to retreat. This master of hers obviously had some kind of unique secret technique to deal with devil cultivators. In addition, the Fuxing sword he possessed was obviously corroded by the devil aura, but he didn't care about it at all. Obviously, the devil aura didn't affect him at all. Following Fu Yaozi's instructions, Mo Tiange left the Western continent several days later. Fu Yaozi's unique secret technique sounded simple. It was nothing more than a set of spells and some things to restrain devils. However, it was precisely because it was simple that Mo Tiange felt it was more powerful than any other method. After all, in a fight of magical powers above the core formation realm, the situation could change in an instant. If it was too complicated, she might as well not use it. However, in this case, she had to prepare even more things. Cloud Wing City was one of the cultivation cities in eastern Tang country. In terms of scale, it wasn't the largest, and in terms of population, it also wasn't the one with the highest population. However, it was undoubtedly the most prosperous one. The reason for this was none other than the fact that it was a city adjacent to the capital of eastern Tang country. It wasn't under the jurisdiction of any cultivation group, and it also had a strong transportation advantage like the capital. Thus, it became the cultivation city with the most transactions. After leaving the Western continent, Mo Tiange, still in the appearance of a young scholar, arrived at Cloud Wing City. Although no one knew Yi Xiaotian was Qin Wei these past few years, with her cautious personality, she still chose Cloud Wing City, a city that didn't belong to any force, to buy what she needed. She had come to this cloud-winged city several years ago when she was traveling around various countries, so she didn't need a guide, or did she need to ask a broker. She was already familiar with the way and found the biggest shop in the city. Although this city wasn't under the jurisdiction of any cultivation group, Jingshu School, one of the 5 great cultivation groups in eastern Tang country, happened to be near the capital. Because of this, Jingshu School had a lot of disciples in Cloud-Winged City, and its shops were also very big. For example, the shop Mo Tiange chose was opened by Jingshu School. "Welcome, senior." As soon as she stepped into the shop, a woman greeted her enthusiastically. Because of the founder of Jingshu School, they accepted a lot of female disciples. Therefore, most of the customers in this shop were women. Women were naturally attentive, so they were even more attentive when greeting customers. Because of this, Jingshu School's shop had always been very popular. It was almost always packed with people. However, Mo Tiange was a core formation cultivator, so she didn't need to squeeze with these people. She was directly invited to a private room upstairs and was received by a cultivator with a higher level. When she saw the female foundation building cultivator, Mo Tiange didn't say anything unnecessary. She directly took out a jade slip from her robe and threw it on the table. "I wonder if your shop has these materials." The female cultivator took the jade slip and used her divine sense to study it. She then smiled and said, "Senior, we have most of these materials in our shop, so we can directly prepare them for you. As for a small portion that's relatively rare, if you trust us, Junior can also prepare them for you in 1 or 2 days." Mo Tiange nodded. Among these materials, some were relatively rare. If it was an ordinary shop, they most likely wouldn't have them. The fact that Jingshu School needed 1 or 2 days to prepare them was already considered very good. She didn't feel like asking shop by shop. Since the other party said they could directly prepare them for her, it saved her a lot of effort. "That being the case, you can prepare them for me." Once she finished speaking, she took out a chinkuan bag from her robe and threw it on the table. "Does your shop accept these things?" The things inside the bag were all kinds of materials she'd accumulated over the years. Some were collected by killing other cultivators, some were exchanged with others, and some were accidentally obtained by herself. Ever since she came to Yunzhong, the spirit stones she had on her had been used up. Coupled with the needs for her cultivation, she'd almost used up all her spirit stones. She might as well take these things out and exchange them for a large amount of spirit stones. Sure enough, when the female cultivator opened the chinkuan bag, she was shocked to see the mountainous pile of things inside. There were tool refining materials, spiritual plants, medicinal pills, magic tools, magic weapons, as well as many demonic beast corpses and beast cores. Some weren't worth much, but some were very valuable. Based on her years of experience in managing the shop, not only would these things offset the materials this senior wanted to buy, but there would also be a lot of surplus. She could also see that these miscellaneous things must have been collected by many cultivators. It seemed this senior looked kind, but his methods were extraordinary. Perhaps many cultivators had died in his hands. Thinking up to this point, the female cultivator didn't dare to be careless. She said respectfully, "Senior, the value of these things is astonishing. Junior can't handle them all by myself. Please give me some time." Mo Tiange also knew that if she took out so many things, it would take the other party a lot of time just to calculate the value, so she didn't express any displeasure. She just nodded and said, "Do what you need to do." "Yes, please wait a moment, senior." This female cultivator was quite efficient. A moment later, she returned with the other 2 foundation building cultivators. In front of Mo Tiange, they counted the things in the chinkuan bag one by one, estimated their value, and made a list. The results shocked Mo Tiange. Originally, she didn't care much about these things. Most of them were obtained from other cultivators, and she had already put away some of the more precious items. Even so, the final result was still hundreds of thousands of spirit stones. Several 100,000 spirit stones. This was the amount of money she'd been paying Xianqing school for several decades. She just realized she'd used up all her spirit stones, so she had no choice but to exchange these things for spirit stones. She didn't expect them to be worth so much money. However, she forgot that ever since she built her foundation, she never lacked spirit stones. Everything she obtained was directly thrown into the Qingquan bag. After more than 100 years of accumulation, many a little makes an ocean, and it became a terrifying number. Senior. After spending most of the day calculating the items, the female cultivator who called herself Lu Shaoqing handed the list to her. This is the specific value. Please take a look, Senior. Mo Tiange took the animal skin paper and glanced at it several times. These people were quite capable. Not only did they calculate the value, but they also divided the items into categories, making it clear at a glance. Among the items, there were valuable demonic beast corpses, beast cores, magic weapons, and so on. Their prices were slightly lower than the market price, but this was how shops receive things, so the price given by Jingshu Pavilion could be considered fair. She handed the animal skin paper back and said, "That's it." Seeing that she didn't have any objections, these foundation building cultivators heaved sighs of relief. They glanced at each other, but Lu Shaoqing said, "Senior, to be honest, the value of these things is too high. With Junior's authority, we can't transfer so many spirit stones in a short time." It just so happens that Senior wants to buy a lot of materials, so Juniors want to offset the cost and make up for the difference. However, because Senior needs time to purchase the things you need, we can't complete the transaction. The reason why Mo Tiange sold these things was to buy the materials on the jade slip. Besides, with her current cultivation level, she wasn't afraid they'd renege on their debt, so she said, "You just need to do it. I'll be staying at Yushi Restaurant in the next few days. When you're done, send the things to Yushi Restaurant." "Yes. Rest assured, Senior. If it's quick, it'll take 1 day, if it's slow, it'll take 2 days. Juniors will definitely do it for Senior." Mo Tiange nodded. Without saying anything more, she stood up and left Jingshu Pavilion. After she left, the 3 foundation building cultivators of Jingshu Pavilion didn't move. "Senior Marshal Sister Lu." One of the cultivators called out to Lu Shaoqing with a hesitant expression. "This senior sold so many things. Should we report this to the steward's hall?" Lu Shaoqing stared at the place where Mo Tiange disappeared. She was silent for a long time before she finally said, "No need to make a fuss. This senior has an extraordinary bearing, so he's probably a disciple of a big cultivation group. If there's something wrong with his background, he wouldn't sell them to us so casually. Besides, judging from the things he took out, not only is his cultivation level profound, but his methods are also extraordinary. We have to do our best." Yes. Lu Shaoqing had a lot of prestige. After she said that, the other 2 foundation building cultivators didn't have the slightest objection. Right after the 3 of them said that, another high-level cultivator appeared at the top of the stairs. His formidable spiritual aura pressure made the 3 of them shift their gazes in an instant. "Marshal Uncle Lu." The aura-refining disciple who led the guests called out timidly, "This senior." Although Lu Shaoqing's cultivation level wasn't high, she'd been taking care of the sex stores for a long time, so her experience was extraordinary. With a single glance, she could tell that the cultivator who just appeared was a nascent soul cultivator. She promptly went to greet him. "Senior, welcome to Jingshu Pavilion. You're tuning in to the A Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."